Chapter 408. I recommend a new book, The Spear Breaks the World, book number 2346448. The author, Yang Jialang, once participated in the book review contest of the coming night. He wrote the coming night finale and won the second prize. Please support him. The great divine priest of judgment, who was sitting on the black jade throne, slowly opened his eyes and looked at the girl kneeling outside the curtain. His face was expressionless, but his eyes seemed to hide many complicated emotions. After a long time, the great divine priest of judgment said coldly, "Although you have become a useless person now, I hope you still have your vision." The voice was slightly hoarse, calm and elegant, but there was a hint of violence that could not be hidden. It directly shook the bead curtain in front of the throne. The clear sound echoed in the empty Taoist hall, like a rainstorm falling into an empty porcelain bowl. Yi Hongyu quietly knelt in front of the curtain. She was not moved by the noise and the power contained in the voice. She just lowered her head and appeared more respectful. A deacon from the judicial department came out from behind the curtain with a file in his hands. He walked to her, smiled gently and comforted her, and then handed the file to her. Yi Hongyu took the scroll quietly. She did not get up and continued to kneel. She carefully read the contents of the scroll and then fell into a long period of thought. The file was sent back to the West Hill by the Divine Hall's diplomatic corps to the Tang Empire. The writer was Priest Cheng Lixue of the Revelation Department. The content of the file was a detailed description of the battle between Ning Ke and Lui Qing at the side door of the academy. The focus of the description was, of course, on the divine skill that Ning Ke revealed at the end. "You have seen that person. What do you think?" The cold and solemn voice of the great divine priest of judgment sounded again from behind the bead curtain. Yi Hongyu listened quietly to the sound of the bead curtains hitting against each other. She said slowly, "Ning Ke's cultivation state is so fast that it has exceeded my expectations. As for the divine skill that the Revelation Department thought of, it seems to me that it is just a facade. Because according to the details, the Haotian divine flame that Ning Ke condensed from the chi of heaven and earth should have burst out from within the blade and not from nature." There was a dead silence in the Taoist hall. Through the details of the file, Yi Hongyu had some doubts about the real means of Ning Ke's knife. This doubt pointed to a very shocking fact, so there was a silence. After a long time, the great divine priest of judgment asked in a low voice, "Are you sure?" Yi Hongyu shook her head and said, "Back then, Mr. Ku had also shown his divine skills to the world. Furthermore, since Ning Ke's handmaiden had become a disciple of the divine priest of light, no one would suspect him without evidence. Even if they did, they would not be able to tell the world about it." The great divine priest of judgment looked at her, who was kneeling in front of him expressionlessly. Yi Hongyu calmly said, "I can do." The great divine priest of judgment looked at the girl's tranquil expression and felt a sense of impatience in his chest. He said angrily, "Then what is the use of you?" Yi Hongyu said after a moment of silence, "At least you have good taste." A deep, thunderous cough suddenly sounded from behind the bead curtain and could not be stopped. After a long time, the great divine priest of judgment stopped coughing and looked at her coldly through the bead curtain. He said, "Your body has been polluted by that devil, Lotus. You need to be purified. It is a good choice to choose the stone house to practice hard and hide from the world. During this time, don't bother with the affairs of the department." Yi Hongyu knew very well that the great divine priest's simple words were equivalent to stripping her of her position as the Grand Master of the Judicial Department. In fact, ever since she returned from the wilderness, she had lived in seclusion in the stone house and rarely cared about the affairs of the Judicial Department. However, ignoring and being deprived of the right to care were two different things. Now her strength was seriously damaged, and her realm had fallen to the middle level of see-through, and it was still going down. If even the position of the priest of the judicial department no longer existed, then the people in the divine hall who had suffered countless hardships in front of her might turn those mocking and contemptuous eyes into real actions. Yi Hongyu knelt in front of the great god's throne and remained silent. The great divine priest of judgment leaned back tiredly and supported his forehead with his hand. He looked at the girl outside the curtain with a trace of boredom and mockery in his deep eyes. As a giant of the divine hall, he absolutely could not accept that someone tried to maintain pride in front of the great god and refused to kneel down humbly. In the past years, because of Yi Hongyu's talent, the hierarch appreciated her, and he also thought highly of her. Together with the person in the temple, he could calmly watch her pride and even support her pride. But now, since she did not have the right to be proud, then let her be silent. I have written a letter to the temple about this matter. Your brother expressed his gratitude to me for handling it. The great divine priest of judgment looked at the girl outside the curtain indifferently, shattering her last psychological dependence. Sure enough, after hearing this, Yi Hongyu's expression became a little gloomy. Her body trembled slightly, and her eyebrows were full of self-mockery and disappointment. Especially when Sang Sang served tea, Cheng Lishue's respectful look made Ning Ke easily have an illusion that this guy was his and Sang Sang's future son. Ning Ke picked up the teacup on the table and thought for a moment. He said, I roughly understand the ins and outs of this matter, but I really can't promise you anything. Cheng Lishue looked at him quietly and suddenly frowned. He said, although there have been some misunderstandings between the Divine Hall and the Academy these years, we still respect each other. Ning Ke said, I respect Haotian Taoism very much. Cheng Lishue sighed and said, Junior sister Sang Sang will be the divine priest of light of the Divine Hall in the future. Including me, hundreds of millions of Haotian believers in the world have to kneel in front of her and dare not speak or look at her. But Mr. 13, you let her make the bed and serve tea here. Then where is the respect for Haotian Taoism? My state has fallen, but I can't be weak. I'll write another chapter. The update time must be very late. I don't know when I can write it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 409. Hearing this, Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang who was cooking in the backyard. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and said, to be honest, I still feel that the whole thing is ridiculous. I watched her grow from a little girl to a little girl. I know she has something special about her, but I didn't expect it to be so special that it could alarm the West Hill Divine Palace. Cheng Lishue said, even if younger sister Sang Sang is an extremely ordinary person, she is no longer ordinary since Haotian chose her through the Divine Priest of Light. And we will definitely carry out Haotian's will and bring her back to the Divine Hall. I don't like to hear such words and tone. Ning Ke looked at the teacup in his hand and said after a moment of silence, because it makes me feel that you are threatening me. It makes me feel that you are trying to take her away from me. Cheng Lishue looked at him quietly and said, you can understand it from another perspective. Ning Ke took a sip of the cold tea and said mockingly, since you are determined to bring her back, how can I understand it? If I don't agree, will you just give up? Cheng Lishue shook his head, the Divine Priest of Light can't be without a leader all the time. Ning Ke put down the teacup and looked into his eyes, if I insist on not agreeing, what will the Divine Hall do? Cheng Lishue heard the toughness in his words. After a moment of silence, he said with a smile, you should know what the Divine Priest of Light means to the entire Haotian Taoism and the West Hill Divine Palace. I'm not sure. Ning Ke still stared into his eyes and asked, even at the cost of a war? Cheng Lishue looked at him with a smile and said calmly, if the successor of the Divine Priest of Light is somewhere else in the world, the Divine Hall will find her even at the cost of the world's blood. Ning Ke said, since you said it somewhere else, then you and the bigwigs in the Divine Hall must know that Sang Sang is now in Chang'an, by my side. Cheng Lixue said after a moment of silence, so I am here to ask younger sister Sang Sang to go back. The word please sounds better. Ning Ke said, but I want to know how determined the divine hall is. Cheng Lixue frowned slightly and said, do you want to know if the divine hall will declare war on the Tang Empire because of this? Declare war on the academy? Do you think the Tang Empire and the academy will go to war with the divine hall because of junior sister Sang Sang? Ning Ke thought of the bloodshed in Chang and many years ago and General Xiaofan, who was still alive and well. After a long silence, he shook his head and said, the Empire and the Academy will not start a war with the Divine Hall over a little girl. But if you really want to take her away from me, I can tell you clearly that the Empire and the Academy will be involved in this war. Cheng Lixue's face turned cold. He stroked his beard and frowned, asking, if Sang Sang doesn't go to West Hill, how will Mr. 13 arrange for my poor daughter in the future? Ning Ke did not notice the change in his expression, and said, I will marry her when she is over 16. Zheng Jing's fingers that were stroking his beard trembled, and 3 strands of beard fell off. He was waiting for Ning Ke to speak, and then he would argue with him. But he did not expect that Ning Ke would say that he would marry Sang Sang without any hesitation or concealment. Wife? Zheng Jing asked in a trembling voice. Ning Ke shook his head. Zheng Jing was slightly angry. Ning Ke shook his head and said, of course it's a wife. How can it be a crooked one? Zheng Jing relaxed a lot, and asked with a smile, will you take a concubine? Ning Ke said bitterly, I want to, but do you think it's possible? Zheng Jing's smile grew wider. His daughter might marry the core disciple of the headmaster of academy, and Ning Ke had promised not to take a concubine. With such a future, it would not be a pity if he did not become the great divine priest of West Hill. In that case, it's up to you whether Sang Sang goes to West Hill or not. Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, had always been a very decisive person. Otherwise, he would not have directly divorced his wife and killed her servant after Sang Sang was killed by his wife, even with the pressure from the Empress. Therefore, after hearing Ning Ke's words and thinking about the pros and cons of the 2 choices, he did not hesitate to remove himself and his wife from this matter, and put all the pressure on Ning Quebec. Ning Ke said painfully, shouldn't we discuss this kind of thing? Zheng Jing stroked his slightly painful chin, and said while shaking his head, Sang Sang is still in Mr. Ning's household register, and you two have a deep relationship. In terms of emotion and reason, Mr. Ning should also make the decision. Ning Ke suddenly realized that his future father-in-law was not someone who could be easily fooled. Zheng Jing looked at him and sneered, don't think that you can fool me and refuse the request of the West Hill Divine Palace just because you are a student of the 2nd floor of the academy. The night was getting late. Mrs. Zheng walked out of the backyard with Sang Sang, and her face was full of reluctance. Zheng Jing pulled his wife aside and whispered a few words to her. Mrs. Zheng covered her mouth and was slightly shocked. When she looked at Ning Ke again, the look in her eyes was very different from before, and it was extremely loving. I thought that Mr. Ning would come often in the future, so I ordered someone to prepare a guest room in the backyard. Mrs. Zheng looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, why don't you rest here tonight? Ning Ke suddenly felt that he had walked into the world of strange stories, and he had the urge to run away. I have an urgent matter to attend to later. He stood up and asked Sang Sang to spend more time with his parents in the Grand Secretary's mansion, and then he left. He went to the 2nd street of Spring Breeze Pavilion. Chao Xiaoshu's house was on this street. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 410. Chi 4 had been waiting outside the Chao mansion. Seeing that Ning Ke had finally appeared, he let out a sigh of relief and led him into the mansion, whispering the latest situation along the way. It was already late at night, but the hall of the Chao mansion was still brightly lit. Several people sat silently in the hall, and the atmosphere was somewhat depressing. When they looked at the old master sitting at the head of the table, they would always have a gentle smile on their faces, but the smile seemed a little forced. Qi 4 led Ning Ke into the hall. Everyone stood up, cupped their fists, bowed, and introduced themselves. Chang San, Chang Siwei. Lu Wu, Lu Si. Fei Lu, Fei Jingwei. Chen 7. The people in the Chao mansion today were all former leaders of the Fish Dragon Gang. After the Spring Breeze Pavilion case, their identities were exposed, and they could only leave the Fish Dragon Gang and return to the imperial court. Now, they had important positions in the Valiant Cavalry Battalion and the Bodyguard Office. Everyone was gathered here for that matter. Before Cao Xiaoshu left Chang'an, he had specially brought his brothers to Lin 47th Street to let Ning Ke meet them. Ning Ke knew the identity of these people. From the perspective of the secret guards, they were considered colleagues, so it was not strange for them to appear here. Chang San and the others looked at Ning Ke with a complicated expression. Before Cao Xiaoshu left, he had vaguely intended to entrust them and the Fish Dragon Gang to Ning Ke, but Ning Ke did not accept. They had always been puzzled about this, and did not understand why Cao Xiaoshu trusted him so much. However, 2 years had passed in a flash, and Ning Ke had long become a celebrity in Chang'an. Only then did they realize that second brother Cao had long seen through this man's extraordinary abilities. "This is old Master Cao," Qi 4 introduced. Ning Ke looked at the white-haired old man, who had a worried expression on his face. For some reason, he felt a little annoyed. He frowned and said, he should not travel far with his parents around, but he does travel happily and freely. Old Master Cao sighed and explained for his son, "In the beginning, I wanted him to take the scholarly exams, and then I wanted him to seek an official position. I've restrained him for half his life. Now that he finally has a chance to get rid of all this, let him go." Ning Ke was slightly taken aback. He did not expect old Master Cao to be so open-minded. He also thought about how Cao Xiaoshu had been the emperor of the underworld in Chang'an for many years. Old Master Cao, who came from a family of scholars, did not care about him at all. He thought that old Master Cao was a smart person who had ideas but was not good at giving them. After figuring this out, he no longer had to hide from the old man. He looked at the people around him and said, "I have interrogated the South Jin Kingdom Sword Master. Second brother Cao must have fought with Liu Bai." There was a burst of exclamations in the hall. Chang Siwei's face was full of worry. They had gone through thick and thin with Cao Xiaoshu for many years and had a kind of almost foolish confidence in him. However, when they heard that the person who attacked was really the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, they could not help but feel shocked and at a loss. The sage was the most powerful man in the world. Of Cao Xiaoshu. And how? Of Cao. Ch Ning Ke said, "Lu Yiqing doesn't know the exact result of that battle. Cao Xiaoshu's sword was taken away, so he must have been seriously injured. But we don't know where he is now." Qi 4 scratched his head and said in a distressed tone, "With second brother Chao's personality, he definitely wouldn't do something so stupid. What we need to confirm now is how serious his injuries are. Is he hiding in a small village or is he imprisoned by the South Jin Kingdom? Not in the Sword Pavilion." Ning Ke looked at the crowd and said, "Lu Yiqing would not dare to lie about this, because the academy will keep him imprisoned until we find Cao Xiaoshu. Besides, the academy has already sent a letter to the Sword Garret to ask Liu Bai." Although the people present used to be famous in the underworld of Chang'an and were now important figures in the imperial court, they did not know much about the world of cultivators and did not know how to deal with it. When they heard Ning Ke's words and knew that the academy would personally come forward, they immediately felt relieved. Chang San added, "His Majesty also knows about this. Tomorrow, he will write an official letter to the king of the South Jin Kingdom to ask for Cao Xiaoshu. I think the people of the South Jin Kingdom will consider it carefully. Chen 7 had been standing silently in the corner, hiding behind the crowd. It seemed that he was not used to being seen by so many people. Suddenly, he said, I think there is something wrong with this. Everyone looked at him, including Ning Quebec. Ning K had noticed that when everyone introduced themselves, only Chen 7 did not. At the same time, he remembered the description of the fish dragon gang in Chang An's Jianghu world. Chang 3 was cold, Qi 4 was ruthless, Lu V was vicious, Fei 6 was vicious, and Chen 7 was sinister. How sinister was Chen 7? The Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, attacked second brother Cao probably because he was eager to hunt, or because he wanted to suppress the Tang Empire's momentum, or because second brother Cao ate a grain from the sword garret. Chen 7 lowered his head and spoke slowly as if he could not feel the crowd's gaze. Although what he said was funny, his voice was as gloomy as a mouse in the shadows. That is not important. The important thing is, why did Lu Yiqing challenge the academy? Why did he take second brother Chao's sword, and why did he want everyone to know about this? I am not a cultivator, and I don't know what cultivators usually think. But I think that if cultivators are still human, then their way of thinking is no different from us ordinary people. Ning K nodded and said, I can prove that. Chen 7 slowly raised his head, and his small eyes shone with a dim light. Lu Bai is the most powerful man in the world, so he cannot be an idiot. It is possible for him to send his own brother to humiliate the academy. Even if he loses, he can use the academy to sharpen his brother's cultivation. It is also possible for him to punish second brother Cao and you for the disciple who died in the hands of the two of you in Spring Breeze Pavilion 2 years ago. But I don't think he will think that it is feasible to take second brother Chao's sword and make you think that second brother Chao is dead, so that his own brother will become blind. Ning K was silent. He recalled the battle at the side gate of the academy and confirmed that what Chen 7 said made sense. If he had not seen Cao Xiaoshu's sword in Lu Yiqing's hand, he would not have chosen to attack so fiercely. It was not good for him to blind the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai's brother. If I were Lu Bai, I would first defeat second brother Cao, who had entered the knowing destiny state, and then let my brother defeat Ning Quebec. That would be enough to make up for what happened in Spring Breeze Pavilion. There is no need for me to make the academy and the Tang Empire a mortal enemy. Chen 7 continued softly, according to the intelligence of the bodyguard office, when you entered the second floor of the academy, your name immediately spread throughout the cultivation world. Even though we are not cultivators, we all know that your name is in the tomes of Arcane, and many details of the Spring Breeze Pavilion case have also been spread. The natural speed of transmission of information is definitely not that fast. At that time, there was already someone behind the scenes adding fuel to the fire. They wanted the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom to focus on second brother Cao and you. Then I believe that there was also someone behind these two incidents. Lu Yiqing holding second brother Chao's sword is one of them. Chen 7 looked at everyone calmly and said, there is only one place in the world that has the ability and courage to provoke the relationship between the Tang Academy and the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom, and also has the right to benefit from this matter. That is the West Hill Divine Palace. Outside the capital of South Jin Kingdom. There was an ancient black and white pavilion on the cliff. It was called the Sword Garret. The building of the Sword Garret led into the cliff. It was a big, quiet cave. The top of the cave reached the peak, and sunlight shone through. At the bottom of the cave, there was a green pond and a thatched hut. It was like a small world of its own. Lu Bai sat in his own small world and looked at the fine bubbles spurting out by the blind fish in the green pond. He slowly reached out and pushed his long hair behind his back. He asked indifferently, who can give me an explanation? The news of Lu Yiqing's defeat in the academy and his blindness had already spread to the South Jin Kingdom. Along with this news came 2 letters from the Tang Empire. One of the letters was written by the Tang Emperor himself, and it was now in the bedchamber of the king of South Jin Kingdom. The king was extremely angry, but also extremely helpless. The other letter was written by an old woman in the academy. It was now quietly placed beside Lu Bai's legs. The seal had been cut, and he had probably already read it. Beside the green pond, more than 10 important second-generation disciples of the sword Garrett knelt. When they heard their master's question, they lowered their heads in silence and did not know how to answer. Lu Yiqing had been defeated in a direct challenge. How could they explain this? Lu Bai looked at the green pond in front of him and said expressionlessly, "My own brother has become a blind man. Who can give me an explanation for this?" A disciple of the sword Garrett said indignantly, "The academy is too ruthless. We must what? Revenge? Why do we need revenge?" Lu Bai said coldly, "Swordsmanship is about the spirit and boldness of advancing forward. Since I wanted him to defeat and kill Ning Ke, then it was natural that he would be defeated and killed by Ning Quebec. Moreover, I wanted him to go to the academy to seek defeat so that he could cleanse his sword heart." The disciples were shocked speechless. Only then did they realize that their master had already expected Lu Yiqing to lose. Lu Bai glanced at the letter beside him and said in a cold voice, "I just don't understand. I asked Yiqing to cleanse his own sword, but why did he bring Chao Xiaoshu's sword? Everything about the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, was a sword, whether it was his loose black hair, the belt around his waist, the slightly swaying sleeves, his eyes, his back view, or his voice." When his voice became colder, the disciples of the sword Garrett beside the pond seemed to see a divine sword slowly being pulled out of the ice. Their eyes were pierced by the sharp sword style and they began to tear up immediately. The disciples were terrified and kneeled on the ground, trembling and not daring to say a word. Lu Bai slowly turned around and looked at the disciples beside the pond coldly. He said, "My brother is an idiot in everything except swordsmanship." Because of his idiocy, he didn't even think of a way to provoke Ning Ke with Chao Xiaoshu's sword. Then who helped him think of it? There was dead silence in the cliff cave behind the sword Garrett. After a long time, one of the disciples who was kneeling beside the pond slowly straightened up. Then he stood up and took 2 steps towards the pond. He bowed deeply but did not speak. Lu Bai looked at this disciple and said coldly, "Is the judicial department better than the sword Garrett?" There is one more chapter. It was written before 1130. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 411. The blind fish in the little green pond were still spitting bubbles. The yellow grass by the pond was still yellow and weak. They were like the companions in the hut. Hearing Lu Bai's question, the disciple who walked to the pond was shocked. He had decided to confess everything, but he did not expect that his master had already known his true identity. Lu Bai said, "I have raised you and taught you for 7 years. You can even keep a cold sword warm. I did not expect that the judicial department was born to be a block of ice." The sword Garrett disciple was silent for a long time before he bowed again and sincerely apologized, "I'm sorry. I didn't expect that it would end up like this." Lu Bai said expressionlessly, "If the judicial department wants to borrow the sword of the sword Garrett to kill someone, they should tell me in advance. Taking without asking is not borrowing, but stealing." The disciple sighed and said, "It is my duty. I do not want to do this." "I know you do not want to do this," Lu Bai repeated tiredly. The disciple slowly straightened his body and calmly looked at Lu Bai across the pond. The fact that he could withstand the fierce sword style from Lu Bai showed that his real cultivation state was much higher than usual. Of course, even if his cultivation state was several levels higher, he would still not be a match for Lu Bai. But there was no fear on his face. The sage of sword Lu Bai was the most powerful man in the world. He was feared by countless cultivators. But he was a deacon of the West Hill Divine Palace. His orders came from the Black Taoist Temple in Peach Mountain. In Lu Bai's words, he borrowed Chao Xiaoshu's sword by virtue of his authority to manage the sword garret. Then he lent it to Lu Yiqing, who was about to go to Chang'an, and said a few words to him. Taking without asking was indeed not borrowing, but stealing. But since the West Hill Divine Palace wanted to borrow the sword to kill someone, then borrowing was borrowing. Even if it was stealing in the eyes of the world, it was still borrowing. After all, Lu Bai was a visiting professor of West Hill. He had to follow Haotian's orders. What could he do to him? Whether Prince Longqing is dead or alive, I think he is ruined. Lu Bai looked at him and said. The disciple replied respectfully, yes. Lu Bai said again, I heard that Yi Hongyu was also ruined after coming back from the wilderness. The disciple said calmly, yes. Lu Bai laughed and said, will you take over the position of Grand Master after returning to Peach Mountain? That disciple also laughed, using silence to express his acknowledgement. Lu Bai smiled even more happily and said, doesn't that mean you can become the great divine priest of judgment in the future? The disciple smiled without saying a word. The smile on Lu Bai's face suddenly disappeared. He looked at the disciple and said expressionlessly, although it is my honor as a teacher that a disciple of the sword garret can inherit the position of great divine priest, I suddenly thought of something. If you really become the great divine priest of judgment, it will be inconvenient for me to kill you. The disciple's body stiffened as he looked at the other side of the pond. Since you are not the great divine priest of judgment, then you have to pay a price for stealing. The disciple's expression suddenly turned cold. He wanted to say something, but he found that there was a hint of sweetness in his mouth. There was something soft and slippery between his teeth. Then he realized that it was his own tongue. Immediately after, his head was severed from his neck and fell to the ground beside the pond. It rolled around and rolled into the green pond. A moment later, a few streaks of blood appeared in the pond. The blind fish smelled the taste of its food and began to spit bubbles more cheerfully. The disciples of the sword garret who had been silently kneeling beside the pond came up and began to clean up the headless corpse. They noticed that the neck cavity was smooth and bloodless, and the fracture seemed to be covered by a transparent film. They could clearly see the trachea, esophagus, bones, and blood. They felt a little disgusted. To Lu Bai, killing an important figure of the judicial department of the Divine Hall was as easy as killing a mouse. His expression did not change at all. However, when his gaze landed on the letter from the academy, his brows gradually furrowed. Find Chao Xiaoshu and send him safely back to Chang'an City. Exchange for my brother. The disciples of the sword garret looked at each other and left with the order. At this time, a middle-aged man walked in from outside. He looked at the floating blood bubbles in the green pond and sighed softly. He walked behind Lu Bai and asked respectfully, Senior brother, has the problem been solved? Lu Bai said, if killing could solve the problem, then the world would be much better in my eyes. The middle-aged man said bitterly, I heard that the great divine priest of judgment valued him very much. This time, he really wanted him to go back to Peach Mountain to take over Yi Hongyu's position. Senior brother, you could have cut off one of his hands. Why did you have to kill him? After a moment of silence, Lu Bai said, bring me a pen and paper. Sunlight poured down from the entrance of the cave on the peak and condensed into a beam that shrouded the green pond, the hut, and the person beside the pond. Lu Bai sat beside the pond under the sunlight and thought for a long time. Then he picked up the pen and paper beside him and slowly and casually scribbled on the yellowish paper. He was not writing, he was drawing. The soft ink pen walked on the paper that could not be spread flat. The lines were twisted and knotted and trembled from time to time. A few simple strokes formed a hollow long and narrow object with difficulty, but it could not be seen what it was. The format was very clumsy, and it looked like the work of a naughty child. However, such a clumsy and simple painting seemed to exhaust Liu Bai's energy. Under the reflection of the water, his cheeks looked a little pale and haggard. The middle-aged man glanced at the painting and his body suddenly stiffened. "Can you tell what I drew?" Liu Bai asked. After a moment of silence, the middle-aged man said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Senior brother, you drew a sword." Liu Bai said with satisfaction, "You can tell that it is a sword." "Junior brother, it seems that your state has improved." The middle-aged man forcibly suppressed his shock and asked, "Senior brother, who are you going to give this sword to?" Liu Bai said calmly, "To West Hill, to Yi Hongyu." The middle-aged man could no longer control his emotions. He knelt behind Liu Bai and said in a trembling voice, "Senior brother, why did you do this? Why did you send it to the Tao addict?" Liu Bai looked at the paper in his hand and said, "Because after the divine priest of light died in Chang'an, only this woman in the whole Peach Mountain still made me admire her. But the sword garret and the judicial department have broken up." The middle-aged man said anxiously in a trembling voice, "If Yi Hongyu really understood your sword style, won't she become a great enemy of the sword garret in the future?" Liu Bai said, "Even without my sword, the Tao addict can still cross the threshold again. I just hope that she can do it faster." He raised his head and looked at the sunlight falling on the peak. He said expressionlessly, "The old judge lent a sword to Yicheng, so I will lend a sword to Yi Hongyu." The purpose of lending a sword was to kill. In a remote stone house in the Peach Mountain of West Hill. "Priest, I am just a messenger. Please don't take it to heart." Chen Bachi looked at Yi Hongyu in front of him. His eyes flickered on the loose green Taoist robe on her, and then fell on her beautiful and charming face again. He used to be the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. Although he was forced by Ning Ke to accept the punishment of the Black Ink Garden disciples when they encountered the horse gang, he was beaten with thorns and stripped of all his duties. But he still had the strength of the upper see-through state, so he still had a high status in the judicial department. In the past, his direct superior was Prince Longqing, but the person he truly feared was Yi Hongyu in front of him. Even if Yi Hongyu was in such dire straits now, he still felt a little difficult to breathe in front of her. He naturally used the old title and spoke very carefully. But after all, things were changing. Everyone in the Divine Hall knew that the great Divine Priest of Judgment had suspended Yi Hongyu from her duties as the priest and asked her to meditate and reflect. Perhaps because of the influence of this matter, Chen Bachi's eyes became more presumptuous than before. While Yi Hongyu was calmly looking out of the house, his eyes moved back and forth on her beautiful cheeks and body. The reason why Yi Hongyu, Mo Shanshan and Lu Qinjia were called the three addicts of the world was not only because of their high cultivation states, but also because they were all very beautiful. Yi Hongyu had always been very beautiful. Her figure had always been very good and very attractive. Now, her delicate and alluring body was shrouded in a wide green Taoist robe. However, Chen Bachi had seen too many images of her wearing a red short skirt. At this moment, the wide green Taoist robe seemed to have disappeared, revealing a pair of straight, tight, and smooth thighs. The young girl was still beautiful and attractive. And because of her current gloomy situation, her timidity made her beauty more real, making some people have the courage to possess this beauty. Chen Bachi's eyes were a little obscene, but he did not dare to do so in his heart, because he did not have the courage. It had nothing to do with the majestic memories of the Tao addict in his heart, but related to what he was going to say today. Lord Luo Kedi is the commander of the Divine Guards and the trusted aide of the Hierarch Lord. You should be very clear about his cultivation state, priest. If he is willing to participate in the fight for the Divine Priest of Judgment, the chances of winning are very high. Seeing Yi Hongyu turn around, Chen Bachi respectfully bowed and said, "If priest thinks this is feasible, the commander will personally come to express his affection and determination to you. He also said that as long as you agree, he will immediately go to the hierarch lord to propose marriage. Yi Hongyu looked at the seemingly respectful old subordinate in front of her and was silent for a long time. Then she calmly said, "Give me some time to think about it." Chen Bachi said repeatedly, "Of course, of course." Yi Hongyu slowly closed the door of the stone house and then sat back on the stone bed shrouded in darkness. For a Hautian Taoism woman who had almost nothing left but her face and body, a dignified commander of the divine guards coming to propose marriage was not only of course, but also a surprise. Her expression was still calm, but her body under the loose green Taoist robe could not help but tremble. The stone bed made a squeaking sound, as if it would collapse at any time. The more I write about Yi Hongyu, the more I like her. I have decided not to let her fall in love, marry, and be alone for the rest of her life. Is this the so-called possessiveness? See you all tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. At this time, she was no longer the Tao addict or a loser. She was just a very ordinary girl. When an ordinary girl was forced to marry, she would naturally get angry easily. Hence, Yi Hongyu became very angry at this moment. She looked coldly at the closed door of the stone house and thought that she should kill Chenbachi, Luokadi, and everyone who dared to look at her like that. However, the anger in her eyes gradually turned into frustration and self-mockery because she had no more time. She could not return to the temple. It seemed that she could only angrily and helplessly sit by the stone bed. At this moment, someone arrived outside the stone house. "Sir, there's a letter for you." The person outside the stone house did not call her a priest. He did not deliberately show respect, but such a simple sentence showed enough respect. This was the respect that only she could feel. Yi Hongyu raised her eyebrows slightly, and her expression changed slightly. In the divine hall, she had not been so respected for a long time. The door of the stone house opened. She recognized that the person was a very ordinary deacon of the judicial department. The deacon respectfully handed over a letter with both hands. Then, without saying anything, he turned and left the stone house. The door of the stone house closed again, and darkness reappeared. Yi Hongyu walked back to the stone bed and sat down. She quietly looked at the letter in her hand and did not speak for a long time. The envelope was made of ordinary craft paper. There was nothing special about it, and there was no writing on the cover. She used to be the Grand Master of the Judicial Department. Although she did not manage the specific affairs of the department, she still had a pair of eyes that could see through all the details in the world and find clues from them. The seemingly ordinary craft paper was the most common craft in the paper workshop in Danzhou. Then this letter came from the South Jin Kingdom. Yi Hongyu was sure that she did not know anyone in the South Jin Kingdom, so she did not know who the writer was. She opened the envelope, took out the letter inside, and slowly unfolded it. The letter was made of yellowish papyrus. There was a pattern drawn on the papyrus. The person who drew the picture was obviously not good at painting. The lines were crooked and trembling. It was extremely ugly and clumsy. It was impossible to understand what he drew. Yi Hongyu looked at the long and narrow hollow pattern on the yellowish paper. Her fingers, which were holding the two corners of the paper, trembled slightly. She did not speak for a long time. She understood what was drawn on the paper. It was a sword. The sword of the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai. The kingdom of Yu was south of the South Jin Kingdom and east of the Great River. It faced the relatively quiet South Sea, so the fishing port was much more prosperous and lively than the one in the kingdom of Song. A young man in a cotton shirt walked out of a fishing boat. He stretched towards the sun and then squinted his eyes, signaling his subordinates to complete the following tasks. This young man's appearance was exceptionally handsome. The severe scar on his cheek didn't make his face appear sinister. Instead, it made him look more composed. He squinted at the red rising sun and felt the wet sea breeze on his cheeks. Suddenly, he felt an unprecedented satisfaction. He said in a low voice, "It doesn't seem bad to live like this for the rest of my life." The young man's subordinates were arguing fiercely with the fish and salt merchants. But these things seemed to have nothing to do with him. He just looked at the sun in silence. The people in the fishing port only knew that this young man was a big merchant from the north. He was in the salted fish business. No one knew what kind of dazzling life this young man had before he started selling salted fish, and what kind of reputation he had in the world. The young man used to be a prince of the Yen kingdom. He was the most famous young powerhouse in the West Hill Divine Palace. He was a brilliant and beautiful man who had planted several peach blossoms on the threshold of the Knowing Destiny state. But now, he was a merchant selling fish. Even though he had been shot in the chest by Ning Ke and his cultivation state was destroyed, even though he had abandoned himself to fight for food with the beggars in the broken temple, he was still Prince Long Qing. Without cultivation state, he still had his fists. Even if his fists could not resist the wind and rain of the world, he still had his wisdom. Most importantly, since he was not dead, he wanted to live a better life. In half a month, he unified the beggar gang inside and outside the capital of the Yen kingdom and became the gang leader. Then, he took a part of the gang's wealth and some loyal subordinates to the Song kingdom. He opened a wine shop and defeated all his peers on the street in a short time. Then, he sold those wine shops, tea houses, and restaurants to an official of the Song kingdom at half price. With 1,000 taels of silver, he started a peddling business. He bought salted fish from the Yu kingdom and sold them to the South Jin kingdom or the Yen kingdom. The business was good. Sometimes, Long Qing could not help but sigh. It seemed that he could do everything well. In such a short time, he had become a big merchant. What was there to be dissatisfied with? However, looking at the salted fish in the bamboo basket, he could not help but think, even if he became the richest merchant in the world, what was the difference between him and the salted fish in the basket? I am in an extremely bad state today. I have a problem with my emotions. This is the only chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 4:13. It was common to feel emotional about the sea, but it was rare to feel emotional about salted fish. However, when he thought about what had happened to him in the past year, even though he was facing a basket of salted fish, Long Qing could not help but sigh. However, he was very clearly aware that any emotions like sighing and sighing with emotion were too unnecessary to him right now. Moreover, it would cause his mind that had just calmed down with great difficulty to once again feel the pain and despair that was difficult to restrain. So, he silently prepared to leave the fishing port. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks. His exquisite leather shoes pressed against the wet and slippery ground as he slowly turned his body around. He saw a boat rising and falling in the waves in the distance, which was full of morning light. Long Qing's eyes were still much sharper than ordinary people's, and he saw a Taoist in indigo standing on the boat. The Taoist in indigo on the boat looked ordinary and there was nothing special about him, but he couldn't move his eyes away because his body became extremely stiff because of the shock. Fishermen and coolies carried heavy catches on their backs and walked through the slippery deck. On the shore, merchants were smoking cigarettes and shouting arrogantly. Seabirds were flying back and forth between the surface of the sea and the ship's mast. The fishing port of Yu country was busy and noisy as usual. It seemed that no one had seen that small boat. Long Qing silently looked at the boat and the Taoist on the boat from a distance of hundreds of feet. His eyes were uneasy with the ups and downs of the waves in the distance. He was not a cultivator now, but he still had his insight. It was clear that the Taoist in indigo must be a cultivator, and he couldn't see through him at all. Even he, who was once powerful, couldn't see through him. The Taoist in indigo on the boat in the distance stood at the bow of the boat with his hands behind his back. He slightly raised his head to look at the rising sun in the east, and his whole body seemed to melt in the reddish morning light. Looking at the back of the Taoist in indigo, Long Qing suddenly had an impulse to run away. At this moment, a calm but oppressive voice sounded in his mind. Is there really such a thing as satisfaction in the world? The Taoist in indigo on the distant sea did not turn around, so he couldn't see whether he spoke or not. But Long Qing knew that the voice in his mind was the Taoist's question. Hearing this question, his handsome eyebrows slightly frowned, and he seemed to be in pain. He lowered his head to look at a struggling shrimp in the mucus at his feet, and murmured, "What can I do if I can't be satisfied?" Then, he raised his head and looked at the Taoist in indigo on the boat in the distance. With some resentment and frustration, he said, "The light has abandoned itself, and the darkness disdains to kill itself. What right do a good-for-nothing like me have to complain? What kind of life can I hope for?" The Taoist's voice sounded again in Long Qing's mind from thousands of feet away. "You have experienced so many things in the past year, but you still don't understand the real relationship between light and darkness. You've experienced so many things in the past year. Don't tell me you still don't understand the true relationship between light and darkness?" Long Qing thought of the dream when he was climbing the mountain in the academy. It was a dream that made him extremely painful, proud, glorious, and ultimately frustrated. Thinking of the boundless golden light in the dream, he suddenly understood something. His body suddenly became cold and began to tremble uneasily under the late spring sun. But that is not my original belief. He stared at the Taoist in indigo on the boat in the distance. His trembling voice was like the wind on the mast. It came out from his lips and teeth stiffly and coldly, with endless despair. The Taoist in indigo did not turn around. He still looked at the red morning sun with his hands behind his back. "Can belief satisfy you?" Long Qing replied, "It used to be." The Taoist in indigo was silent. Long Qing lowered his head and looked at the struggling shrimp at his feet. He asked painfully, "Is this really okay?" The Taoist in indigo said, "Yes." Long Qing asked with some confusion, "Is it worth it?" The Taoist in indigo said, "It depends on whether you are satisfied or not. If you are satisfied with the present, it is not worth it. If you are not satisfied, it is worth it. I have always thought that there is no real satisfaction in the world, so I think it is worth it no matter when." In the end, it came back to the original problem of satisfaction. Long Qing forcibly suppressed his confusion, shock, and helplessness. He frowned and thought hard. In a long silence, he recalled the past and guessed his future life. Was he really satisfied? In capital Cheng, he led the beggars to fight for food and territory. He stole money by kidnapping and cheating. Finally, he earned a sum of money and went to the kingdom of Song to open a shop and sell salted fish to earn money. Just like that, he lived a peaceful and happy life and became an ordinary successful businessman. He married a beautiful and gentle wife, had 2 concubines, and had many children. Many years later, when he was old and made sure that no one in Yen Kingdom was after him, he secretly took his family back to capital Cheng. He knelt on the royal road outside the palace and pointed at the equally old emperor. He trembled and told his grandson that Grandpa had a good relationship with the emperor, but he should have been sitting there. Then, he was about to die. He asked his family to carry him to the West Hill Divine Kingdom. He came to the foot of the holy mountain full of peach blossoms and squeezed into the crowd of sick women who came to pray to heaven for medical help. Then, He weakly lay on the stretcher and watched the indifferent and proud cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the black-robed deacons pass by. He looked at the majestic Taoist temples on the high ground. 2 lines of tears flowed down his wrinkled cheeks and he cried weakly, "I should have been sitting there." That kind of life was right. For that kind of life, it was worth doing anything, even if he had to betray his original belief and accept the most painful spiritual baptism. Long Qing stood in the morning light by the sea and stood in the smell of salted fish and sea breeze. He was unconscious and didn't smell the stench. He was like a soulless body. Suddenly, he knelt down. With a crisp sound, his knees crushed the struggling shrimp in the mucus in front of him. He looked at the boat hundreds of feet away and the body of the Taoist in indigo. He put his hands on the ground and knelt down. Tears flowed down his face silently. He trembled and said, "Please guide my way." The voice of the Taoist in indigo sounded in his mind again, "Follow me." Long Qing, who was kneeling on the ground, was a little confused. He didn't know how to approach the boat, nor how to follow the back of the Taoist in indigo on the boat. When he raised his head, he found that he was no longer in front of the fishing port, but a vast blue sea. Seabirds fell into the sea from time to time, disturbing the morning light and the color of the sea. The back of the Taoist in indigo was only 2 steps away from him. He didn't know when he had come to the boat. Long Qing looked at the Taoist in indigo standing at the bow of the boat and was shocked speechless. When he saw the picture on the side of the boat, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. The South Sea was much calmer than the East Sea, but the wind and waves were still very strong. Ships that could sail in the South Sea, no matter their size, were very particular. Before the construction of the ship, the wood used for the ship had to be piled up in the shipyard for a long time, exposed to the wind, rain, and sun. Only after the stress was relieved could it be used. In other words, any ship wood was dead wood. However, at this time, a peach blossom grew on the side of the boat. A new peach blossom grew from the dead wood. It was a black peach blossom, slightly trembling in the sea breeze and threatening in the morning light. "I have something to report to you. In the past 2 days, I really have emotional problems, and I really can't write. That's all I have to take responsibility for. I will change it as soon as possible and will never miserably step into the same mistakes as last month. Fortunately, I can have a day off tomorrow. I will deal with the details and emotions, and then I must put pressure on myself. I will have 3 chapters on Sunday and 3 chapters on Monday. If I feel right, then I hope that the 3 chapters can last for 2 more days. I bow to you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 4:14. Looking at the clansman's formation, the woman knew that what she was most afraid of had finally happened. Looking at the mud on her body and smelling the stench, she thought about what might happen. Fear and grievance intertwined in her heart, and tears flowed down uncontrollably. She looked at the chief and asked in a trembling voice, "What happened?" The strong man looked at her angrily and growled, "You put a man from another place in the house, and you dare to ask us what happened? You unfaithful B*tch, you're a disgrace to the whole clan." The woman lowered her head in silence, panicked and didn't know what to say. Although she wanted to explain that nothing had happened between her and the man from another place, she knew that the clansman wouldn't believe her. More importantly, she knew very well that she was indeed unfaithful and wanted something to happen between her and the man from another place. The chief coughed lightly and stopped the villagers from smashing the house. He walked to the woman, looked at her slightly lowered head, and glanced at her plump breasts. He sighed and said, "Lindsay, although you are from Yueluan, can we not treat you well after you married into our village?" The woman lowered her head and begged with a trembling voice, "Thank you for taking care of me all these years, 4th elder master and the clansman. The chief's face suddenly turned cold. He said, "After Brother Cheng died, I made the decision to let you remarry. You refused and said that you wanted to keep your chastity for Brother Cheng. So we did as you said. But what are you doing now?" Hearing this, the woman raised her head and looked at the strong man. She thought sadly, "Chief, you want me to remarry your son? How can this be? When Brother Cheng fell off the cliff and died while picking herbs, he was by his side. Who knew what had happened at that time?" At this moment, Cao Xiaoshu walked out of the house. The villagers saw that the man from another place didn't run away and even dared to appear in front of them. They became even angrier and brandished their hoes, ready to beat him to death. However, the clan elder strangely stopped the crowd. Cao Xiaoshu had been listening for a while in the house. Looking at the situation, he knew what had happened. When he was in Chang'an, he knew that the people of the Great River Nation were conservative and traditional, especially women in rural villages and towns, had an extremely low status. However, he didn't expect that such a storm would arise. He walked in front of the clan leader and gave a few sincere words of explanation. The clan leader expressionlessly shook his head and said, "This matter concerns the reputation of our clan. How can we let such a shameless woman go so easily?" Cao Xiaoshu said calmly, "If I really had an affair with her, would the clan leader punish me?" The chief looked at him and said after a moment of silence, "I know you are a Tang, so as long as you apologize and leave a sum of money as compensation, you can leave." Cao Xiaoshu glanced at the trembling woman and asked, "What are you going to do with her?" Before the chief could say anything, the strong man fiercely said, "Drown him in the pig cage." The words, "pig cage," seemed to have a strange allure to these villagers. Immediately, shouts rang out in the small courtyard. They all shouted that they wanted to drown the woman in the pig cage, and then strip her naked and beat her with a paddle. Cao Xiaoshu looked around and saw the greedy and obscene looks in the men's eyes. He looked at their twisted faces because of excitement and said softly, "It seems that we can kill these people." The small courtyard under the big banyan tree suddenly became quiet. The clansmen seemed to think that they had heard something, but they could not believe what they had heard. The chief's face suddenly became gloomy. He looked at Cao Xiaoshu and was about to say something. However, before he could speak, Cao Xiaoshu turned to look at the woman and asked gently, "Do you think we should kill these people?" The woman's body was slightly stiff, and she came to her senses after a moment. She had been desperate, but now, looking at Cao Xiaoshu's gentle expression, she felt that hope was returning to her body. She looked at the hateful clansman, and her body suddenly trembled violently. She cried and said, "I am not from this village. I am from the forest of Yueluan Kingdom. I was sold here by human traffickers. My husband is dead. They want me to marry the chief's son. I don't want to marry, I don't want to marry." She had never said these words to outsiders because there were no outsiders in this remote village. No one believed her words, and even if they did, no one dared to sympathize with her. So she wanted to know the story of the outside world, and wanted to have a story with the outside world. At this moment, she finally shouted these words because she wanted to live. "It's good that you killed them." Cao Xiaoshu looked at the people in the yard and asked, "Who did you kill?" The woman pointed at the white-haired chief and the strong man, and said in a trembling voice, "This father and son deserve to die the most." Cao Xiaoshu took 2 steps forward. The clansmen in the yard raised the hoes and iron forks in their hands, wanting to hit him. The fence was trampled by these people. Cao Xiaoshu picked up a piece of bamboo. Then he waved it twice. The heads of the chief and the strong man flew up. The clansmen looked at this scene in a daze, and their faces suddenly turned pale. Someone shouted, and everyone fled in all directions. No one cared about the 2 bodies on the fence. Murder. Go and report it to the government. Frightened and desperate cries rang out in the village, startling the fish in the pond and disturbing the birds in the banyan tree. It tore apart the peace and rules that had lasted for thousands of years. The headless bodies of the chief and his son were still lying in the simple and crude yard. The woman's face was pale, and her body was trembling slightly. But the luster in her eyes was brighter than it had been in the past 10 years. Chao Xiaoshu looked at her and asked, "Do you still miss this village and this yard?" The woman shook her head and murmured, "How could I?" Chao Xiaoshu said, "Then come with me." The woman looked at his eyes in surprise, and her eyes were full of surprise. She said nervously, "Okay." She was very nervous, so she didn't ask where he was going. She wanted to go with him. As long as she could leave this village, she was willing to go wherever he went. However, at this moment, Chao Xiaoshu suddenly became silent. He frowned slightly, as if he was hesitating. Some words should not be said at this time. The woman's body was slightly stiff. After a moment of silence, she said bitterly, "Yes, I am a shameless and dissolute woman. How can you bring me home? You'd better give me some money, and I will live on my own. In the end, I will still ask you for money, but I don't care if you laugh at me." Chao Xiaoshu looked at her and said, "I will only give money to one kind of woman." The woman's face was pale, and she said miserably, "I see. Unfortunately, although I am a dissolute widow, and I want to give my body to you, I am not willing to earn money from you with my body." Chao Xiaoshu looked at her eyes quietly, and said gently, "You misunderstood me. I mean, I will only give money to my wife, but I don't know if you are willing to give it to me." The woman was stunned for a long time before she came to her senses. She rubbed her eyes, wanting to cry, but also feeling a little embarrassed. Chao Xiaoshu looked at her and smiled. He went into the house, packed his luggage, and then walked into the yard. Looking at the woman who was still in a daze, he said, "Let's go." The woman took the luggage from his hand. The two then left. Ning Kai had been thinking about 3 things. The first thing he wanted to know was why the Sadhu Daosher was able to find him in Chang and with such accuracy. Was there someone behind the scenes who was behind this? Second, if the judicial department of the Divine Hall was involved in the sword garrot's provocation of the academy and the theft of Chao Xiaoshu's sword, then where would the sword garrot be if not Chao Xiaoshu? Third, how to reply to the West Hill Divine Palace's request to take Sangsang away. The last 2 things were related to the West Hill Divine Palace. Thinking of Cheng Lishua's attitude towards the judicial department, he felt that he should go to the Southern Gate Temple, at least to inquire about some things. It wasn't his body that had been seen through, but the concealment he had deliberately placed on his soul had been seen through. Even the direction of his fate had been seen through, leaving him with nowhere to hide. Ning Kai suddenly became alert and said, "Ning Kai of the Academy greets the Great Divine Priest." The Great Divine Priest of Revelation said, "Forget it." Ning Kai sat down on the chair opposite the Great Divine Priest. It was quiet in the old brush pen shop. Ning Kai understood that he was the owner and should speak first. However, he did not know how to do it. The steam from the teacup gradually dissipated, and a green tea leaf floated up from the bottom of the teacup. Ning Kai's throat was a little dry. He said in a slightly tight voice, "Can we think about it again?" Cheng Lishue, who was standing behind the Great Divine Priest of Revelation, frowned and said unhappily, "Think about it again? Mr. 13, can you stop procrastinating?" The Great Divine Priest of Revelation raised his right hand and stopped Cheng Lishue from continuing. He said, "I have something to do in West Hill, so I have to go back. Before I go back, there must be a result." Ning Kai did not pay attention to the Great Divine Priest's words at all. He was thinking about something else. He laughed dryly and said, "The Great Divine Priest of Revelation is leaving? Did you buy any local specialties?" Cheng Lishua's expression was very ugly. The great divine priest of revelation laughed and shook his head. The smile on his old face gradually faded, and the deep wrinkles gradually smoothed out. The great divine priest of revelation looked at Ning Kei's eyes quietly and said, "You know how important she is to the divine hall." Sang Sang looked down at the tip of her shoes outside her skirt and quietly moved 2 steps behind Ning Kei, as if hoping that he could cover himself. However, he could not. The great divine priest of revelation looked at Sang Sang lovingly and said, "Because she is the successor of light." Ning Kei hesitated and said, "Sang Sang is still very young. It doesn't sound right for her to be the great divine priest of West Hill and be on an equal footing with you." Cheng Lishua glanced at the great divine priest of revelation and explained softly, "The succession of the great divine priest is a long process. After returning to West Hill, younger sister Sang Sang must first study the scriptures and then go to the secular world to cultivate in seclusion. She must experience the joys and sorrows of the human world before she can inherit the great divine priest's position. The preparatory work before this is called political training." Then he continued to explain, "It will take a long time for younger sister Sang Sang to ascend to the great divine priest of light, so the divine hall is anxious. It is best to enter the political training period as soon as possible." Ning Kei suddenly asked, "Is there a holiday?" Cheng Lishua was slightly startled. The white silk handkerchief was gradually dyed red by the blood that flowed from his eyes. The deep wrinkles at the corner of his eyes were also dyed red by the blood, like a gorgeous peach blossom. It was more like a barren land soaked in blood. Before the West Hill Diplomatic Corps left Chang'an, Ning Kei went to the Southern Gate Temple and learned from Cheng Lishua that the Judicial Department was indeed behind the attack on the Sword Garret. He became more and more worried about Cao Xiaoshu's safety. When he was thinking about leaving Chang'an to look for him in the South Jin Kingdom, he suddenly received a letter from the Great River Kingdom. He had thought that it was from Shanshan, and he felt an indescribable sense of joy. Then he found that it was from Cao Xiaoshu. He was disappointed and then happy, and then angry. He's alive and well. Why didn't he write a few letters in advance? I think he's really happy outside. He's so happy that he even forgot his own father. What an idiot. A middle-aged man in a bright yellow robe angrily waved his sleeves and scolded. I guess second brother Chao met a pretty widow who grinds tofu in a small mountain village. His legs turned to jelly and he couldn't bear to come back. Only an idiot would do something like that. Ning Kei looked at the letter in his hand and sarcastically said. In the secluded hall deep in the Tang Imperial Palace, the curses of idiots could be heard from time to time. The Empress and the others looked at the angry expressions of the Emperor and Ning Kei and could not help but laugh. People really need to put pressure on themselves. Today's writing was really smooth. Tomorrow there will be 3 more chapters. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 4:16. Speaking of idiots, there were 2 people in Chang'an who liked to call others idiots. One was the Emperor of Tang, and the other was Ning Quebec. It was just that His Majesty had always scolded people as idiots regardless of the occasion and situation. Ning Kei, on the other hand, was used to calling others idiots in a mean tone when chatting with Sang Sang. He was petty from the inside out. That was why he was so excited to scold Cao Xiaoshu as an idiot with His Majesty in the Imperial Palace today. His spittle flew everywhere. The word idiot flew like rain in the quiet palace, causing the Empress and all the eunuchs and serving girls to be surprised and amused. They covered their mouths tightly to stop themselves from laughing. However, the scene was, after all, a bit awkward. The empress signaled the female official beside her with her eyes and led the serving girls and eunuchs out of the palace quietly. After a long time, the emperor and the minister in the palace finally vented their anger towards Cao Xiaoshu. They stopped panting, and the sound of the word idiot gradually faded away. The emperor picked up a square handkerchief from beside the couch and wiped the sweat on his face. He looked at Ning Ke with satisfaction in his eyes. As a wise emperor, sometimes he was bound by the words, wise emperor, and could not be happy. Today he could find someone to curse with him, which made him feel very comforted and happy. What's wrong with your little handmaiden? The great divine priest of revelation didn't tell me about it before he left Chang'an. How did you discuss it? The emperor tapped on the table and motioned for Ning Ke to drink tea. Ning Ke picked up the teacup but didn't drink it immediately. He answered, we'll talk about it in 3 years. If Sang Sang wants to go to West Hill, she can go. The emperor asked, tell me about your little handmaiden. How did she suddenly become the young lady of Zheng Jing's mansion? How did she suddenly become the great divine priest of light? Ning Ke took a sip of tea to moisten his throat. He carefully told the emperor about how he picked up Sang Sang from a pile of corpses by the roadside and what happened to her in the following years. The emperor was silent for a while and said with emotion, such a strange life experience is hard to describe. The relationship between you and her is rare in the world. You should cherish it. Ning Ke nodded. The emperor looked at him and asked, why didn't she follow you into the palace to see me today? Ning Ke said, she went to the princess's mansion to play. Her Highness has always been on good terms with her. Moreover, the little prince missed her after not seeing her for a few days. As the emperor listened to his explanation, his brows furrowed slightly in worry. Ning Ke understood where His Majesty's worries came from. Ning Ke expressed that he could accept this decision, but he wanted to let the emperor know that he could not accept the pressure from the Tang Empire's military. He wanted an explanation. After a moment of silence, the emperor said, General Su Shi has never been defeated on the battlefield, but he can never raise his head in front of youngest uncle. It's natural for him to be hostile to the academy. As for why he is so vigilant against you, I really don't know. Maybe you should ask him himself. Ning Ke thought that even though he was now a student of the second floor of the academy, it was still a behavior that was asking for a beating to confront the top military man of the Tang Empire. The emperor did not let him stay in this mood for too long. He stood up from the side of the bed and raised his sword-like eyebrows. He looked at him and said in a clear voice, have you brought that thing? Ning Ke raised his hand to touch the hard object in his arms and said, yes. That's good. I'll take you to a place. The emperor flicked his sleeves and walked out of the hall. It was the end of spring, the most enchanting time in Chang'an. Walking in the imperial palace, one could see blooming spring flowers everywhere, green leaves gradually flourishing, quiet lakes without ripples, and pavilions occasionally standing alone. The emperor did not bring any attendants or bodyguards with him. He only brought Ning Ke out of the palace and walked to the depths of the imperial garden. Along the way, the eunuchs and palace maids they met all retreated to the side of the road in awe and silence. Then, they looked at the two figures that were getting further and further away with surprised and puzzled expressions on their faces. The people in the imperial palace were the smartest people. Of course, they knew that the young man in black beside the emperor was the legendary Master Ning Quebec. But they did not understand where His Majesty was taking Ning Ke to and why he did not leave any servants with him. There was a 2-story wooden building in the depths of the imperial garden. It was painted in red and looked very exquisite. But compared to the towering palace in the distance, it still looked a little shabby. The emperor brought Ning Ke to the small wooden building and said, this is it. Outside the small building, the green trees were dense and the wildflowers were in full bloom. It was obvious that they had not been trimmed for a long time. Ning Ke looked at the grass growing between the stone bricks under his feet and thought that perhaps very few people would come here. Then, he raised his head and looked around. His eyes met the walls of the imperial palace and confirmed that this small wooden building was not only in the center of the imperial garden, but also in the center of the entire imperial palace. The emperor pushed open the door of the small wooden building and walked in. Ning Ke followed him in. After entering the small wooden building, His Majesty did not go up the stairs but walked downstairs. A dark passage extended to the depths of the wooden building. Ning Ke looked at the dark passage and could not help but raise his eyebrows. He thought that it was indeed the most important place of the Tang Empire. There was nothing new at all. There were things like luminous pearls in the hard stone walls of the passage, emitting a faint light. It did not make people feel afraid, but made people feel at ease. Ning Ke followed His Majesty downstairs. Looking at the luminous pearls beside him, he thought that any one of them could probably buy the building of pines and cranes. Thinking of the shabby two-story wooden building above, he increasingly felt that the person who built this place was a man who was inwardly coquettish. As he was thinking about these trivial things, his pupils suddenly shrank and he looked up at the stone wall alertly. He saw several deep lines in front of several luminous pearls. Those lines contained an extremely neutral, peaceful, yet indifferent and extremely strong aura. It seemed that as long as it was emitted, it could crush everything in the passage into powder. Ning Ke clearly sensed this aura and gasped in shock. As a talisman cultivator, of course, he could understand that these lines were all Fu characters. These Fu characters were very powerful, but they seemed to be incomplete. Now these lines on the stone wall were just fragments of the original Fu lines. He looked at the lines on the stone wall and calculated the time of their existence. He was shocked and thought silently, what state did the predecessor who carved these Fu lines 1,000 years ago reach? He could actually maintain the power of Fu for such a long time. Could a divine talisman master like his master do it? The emperor noticed his expression and looked up at the stone wall above. After a moment of silence, he sighed with emotion, "When my father took me here for the first time, I was as shocked as you. I could only vaguely feel the power of these Fu characters, but I did not want to come here often. What are the conditions to activate these Fu characters?" Ning Ke was indeed the successor of Master Yen Sei. He raised the most critical question. Even if the person who carved the Fu characters 1,000 years ago was a divine talisman master, how could the divine talisman he made still maintain its power after his death? It should be known that not every nation master of Tang was a talisman master. Today, Li Qingshan was not one. The emperor said, "There are no conditions. Anyone who enters the passage will be killed by these Fu characters." Ning Ke asked confusedly, "Anyone?" The emperor nodded and calmly repeated, "Anyone." Ning Ke could not help laughing and said, "Your Majesty and I are not people?" The emperor also laughed. After a moment, his smile gradually disappeared and he calmly said, "I am the Emperor of Tang. I hold the national seal and have the imperial aura. So these Fu characters can't hurt me." Ning Ke asked, "What about me?" The emperor said, "You are now the owner of these Fu characters. Today's state is not as good as yesterday's, but I have gradually recovered. I will try to finish the second chapter before 11:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. No one knew if he thought of Master Yen Sei, but his face showed a faint sadness and nostalgia. Ning Ke reached out to hold the pestle and felt the cool and warm touch in his palm. He was a little nervous and put his left hand on it. He took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down so that his hands were no longer trembling. Then he put the pestle upright and slowly inserted it into the hole. The pestle in his hand sank into the ground inch by inch. Ning Kai did not feel any resistance, but he could feel the smoothness of the ground. With a light click, the pestle touched the bottom of the cave, as if it was locked by some kind of spring. A small part of the pestle was still exposed on the ground. The complicated patterns engraved on it made it look like a flower carved out of the pestle. Ning Kai did not know what was going to happen next. He subconsciously stepped back and wanted to stay away from it. There was no vigilance on the emperor's face. He just quietly looked at the half of the pestle on the ground. Ning Kai stopped and stood beside the emperor. After a moment, the half of the pestle exposed on the ground suddenly lit up. More precisely, it should be the complicated patterns on the pestle that were difficult to understand lit up, like a flower bathing in the sun. The complicated patterns became brighter and brighter. The light spread to the lower part of the pestle. Even the granite ground was illuminated and the lines in the stone could be seen. The light in the lines on the pestle gradually condensed and seemed to become a kind of luminous liquid. It gradually flowed back and forth along the lines, which was very beautiful. A crack suddenly appeared on the granite ground next to the pestle. The crack spread extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it passed through the soles of Ning Kai's feet, which scared him. Then he noticed that these cracks were not real cracks, but grooves formed by the regular subsidence of the ground. Numerous stone grooves appeared on the previously clean and empty ground. More and more stone grooves appeared, and they became denser and denser. Like an invisible carving knife, it drew countless straight lines on the smooth stone ground and cut the ground into countless parts. The liquid light on the pestle flowed down the complicated lines and into the stone groove next to it. Then, like a stream, it flowed along the stone groove and into the distance. However, there was absolutely no stream in the world that could flow as fast as the liquid light in the stone groove. In a flash, it had spread to the edge of the ground. No one knew how much light was contained in the pestle. It kept flowing to the ground, as if it was inexhaustible. After a moment, all the stone grooves were lit up. Looking at the magical scene in front of him, Ning Kai revealed a nervous and solemn expression. But his eyes became brighter and brighter. His gaze kept moving along with the flow of the liquid light in the stone groove. The stone groove at the edge of the ground was the deepest and contained the most liquid light. For extremely long straight lines surrounded the ground in the center of the hall, like a city. There was a deep, wide, and dazzling stone groove in the middle. It seemed to be a long street. This is the Vermilion Bird Avenue? Ning Kai looked at the stone groove and muttered to himself. His Majesty looked at his expression and smiled slightly. Suddenly, the calm liquid light in the stone groove violently rolled, as if there was a raging fire under the ground and the liquid light was about to boil. Ning Kai's expression became more and more solemn. A very faint sound rang in the underground hall, as if countless flowers were blooming, as if countless green trees were breathing, as if countless people were cheering. In reality, it was just the liquid light in the stone groove that had evaporated into gas. The evaporated gas filled the air in the hall, gently swaying like clouds. Then, unable to escape the gravitational pull of the stone groove, it slowly converged into lines or surfaces that glowed with light. These lines and surfaces that glowed with beautiful and pure light formed countless three-dimensional structures on the ground. They were countless glowing buildings that looked so illusory, yet so real at the same time. Ning Kai looked at the palace formed by light in front of him. He looked at the Yanming mountain in the distance, which was almost at the waist height. He looked at the Wanyan pagoda that was not even knee-high and looked at the thick and glossy city wall in the distance. He was so shocked that he could not speak for a long time. This was a miniature Chang'an city. But in this Chang'an city, it was real and alive. The emperor walked outside. Ning Kai followed behind him. When his feet stepped on the southern gate temple that was condensed from light, his body was a little stiff. When he stepped on the houses in the west of the city, he was even more careful. He always felt that he had become a giant, and any random step would cause great harm. Fortunately, the lines and surfaces that were condensed from light and vapor did not seem to be connected to the real world. When they touched his body, there were no changes. Walking in the miniature Chang'an city that was condensed by light, Ning Ke felt very complicated and shocked. He saw many familiar buildings and sceneries. He even found Lin 47th Street and the old brush pen shop among the densely packed buildings. At this moment, the old brush pen shop was just a box. Following behind His Majesty, they finally walked out of this miniature Chang'an city. For some reason, Ning Ke felt much more relaxed. He held his chest and gasped. The emperor looked at the Chang'an city in front of him and said, "The entire Chang'an city is a big array." Ning Ke had heard about this from Master Yen say, the first big array in the world, the God-stunning array. Chapter 418. Master Yen Sei once said that Chang'an was a big tactical array and also a big talisman, and the talisman was an article. Ning Ke looked at the city in front of him, and his eyes fell on the relatively red ball of light somewhere in the south of the straight stone trough. He silently thought that it was probably the seal printed next to the article. The relatively red ball of light was the vermilion bird. As Ning Ke's eyes fell on it, the edge of the ball of light slightly changed, as if it had sensed something. At this moment, Ning Ke vaguely understood how to start the big tactical array of Chang'an. It was so simple, so he was very vigilant. After leaving the shabby two-story wooden building, Ning Ke followed the emperor through the imperial garden again, passing through the awe and confusion of those eunuchs and palace maids, and came to the imperial study. It was quiet in the imperial study. Ning Ke held the array eye pestle wrapped in cloth, and felt a heavy feeling between his fingers. After a long silence, he said, "I'm a little worried that I can't hold it." The emperor looked at him and said, "Master Yen Sei only has one disciple, and the headmaster of academy has agreed that you represent the academy to enter the human realm. So who else can hold it if not you?" Ning Ke said, "Am I really going to be the nation master in the future?" Second brother and master agreed that I would only cultivate talismans with master, and not be counted as a member of the Southern Gate Temple. Who said that the nation master of Tang must be a Taoist from the Southern Gate Temple? Yes, in order to save some face for the West Hill Divine Palace, it has been handled this way for hundreds of years. But habit doesn't mean rigid rules. Moreover, you are the disciple of Master Yen Sei, and the West Hill Divine Palace can't find any problems with your identity. The emperor said, "From your tone, it seems that you don't want to be the nation master?" Ning Ke said, "When the West Hill Divine Palace wanted to take Sang Sang back to be the great divine priest of light, I thought it was unreliable. Now that I want to be the nation master of Tang, I think it's even more unreliable." He said bitterly, "Now that I think about it, I'd rather stay in the old brush pen shop to sell calligraphy. Qing Shan is very happy to be the nation master. Look at him, he doesn't want to die so soon. Whether you want to be the nation master or not is a matter for the future. You don't need to worry about it now." The emperor changed the topic and said, "Speaking of selling calligraphy, Ning Ke, it's been a few days since your calligraphy has been sold. Come on, take advantage of today's visit to the palace to write a few more." Ning Ke glanced at His Majesty and thought about how he was forced to leave behind many calligraphy sections every time he entered the palace. If Sang Sang knew about this, she would be heartbroken. However, the Tang Emperor personally chose the brush, ground the ink, and waited on the side. In the face of such treatment, no calligrapher in the world would be able to refuse to write. He sighed helplessly in his heart and walked to the table. At this moment, someone knocked on the door of the imperial study. The empress slowly walked in with a plate of food in her hands. Ning Ke bowed slightly and stepped aside. "Eat something first. The empress smiled and took the emperor's hand to the tea table. She handed a bowl of sour tea to him and then walked to Ning Kei's side. She rolled up her sleeves and picked up an ink stick, saying, "Let me grind the ink." Ning Kei thought to himself that he was not a bold and unrestrained person like Li Taibai. Although the empress was plump, she was not a romantic person like Yang Yuhuan. What was this? He refused repeatedly and dared not. The empress smiled warmly and jokingly said to him, "You dare when His Majesty grinds the ink for you, but you say you don't dare when I grind the ink for you. Could it be that in your eyes, I am much more terrifying than His Majesty?" The emperor, who was drinking the sour tea, laughed and pointed at Ning Quebec. He said, "She is the one grinding the ink for me when I write. Today, I will let you enjoy this treatment." What kind of treatment was this? An emperor's treatment? Ning Kei smiled bitterly and did not refuse any more. He stood by the table and waited calmly. Thinking of what the empress had said, he felt a little strange in his heart. In his opinion, the empress was much more terrifying than His Majesty. In the world shrouded by Haotian's divine light, the saintess of diabolism could actually become the empress of the Tang Empire, the strongest country in the world. No matter how he looked at it, it was strange and terrifying. Moreover, the empress was Xiaoho's sister. Ning Kei looked at the empress's silhouette in silence. The emperor wanted to appreciate Ning Kei's new work, so he stayed in the imperial study. The empress and Ning Kei left the imperial study and came to the imperial garden. The empress stopped under a begonia tree and waved her hand to signal the palace maids to disperse. Then she looked back at Ning Quebec. Ning Kei knew that His Majesty was looking for an excuse to let him and the empress be alone. Of course, it was not because of any absurd reason. It was because of the general in Tiang City. However, he did not understand why the empress would come in person. Was she not worried that someone would see something? This was because he did not understand the relationship between the emperor and the empress. Or rather, he had never believed that the relationship between a commoner and a couple existed in the emperor's palace. The empress was beautiful, charming, gentle, and not timid. Standing under the begonia tree, her appearance was even more beautiful than the begonia flowers. Ning Kei thought that she was indeed the saintess of diabolism. She was indeed beautiful. The empress looked at him quietly and suddenly said, "Has His Majesty told you?" After a moment of silence, Ning Kei replied, "What does Your Majesty mean?" The empress said calmly, "About General Xiaoho." Ning Kei nodded. The empress said, "Now you should know who I am." Ning Kei shook his head, looking a little confused. The empress smiled sweetly and said, "What a naughty child. I really don't understand why the headmaster of academy would accept you as a student." Ning Kei smiled and said, "Many people have the same question." The smile on the empress's face gradually faded. She looked at him calmly and proudly and said without any other emotions, "Xiaoho is my brother. I used to be the saintess of diabolism." In Tuyang City, Ning Kei had already known the biggest secret of the Tang Empire through the conversation between second brother and Xiaoho. However, he did not expect that the empress would admit it directly without any disguise. That was why he was still extremely shocked. The empress looked at him and said, "I am very curious about the problem between you and Xiaoho. Although he is violent and enjoys killing on the battlefield, he is definitely not an idiot like you and His Majesty like to call him. He should be very clear that killing a student of the headmaster of academy will not do him any good." After a moment of silence, Ning Kei said, 2 years ago at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road in Min Mountain, General Xiaoho's subordinates tried to kill Princess Liu. I was there at that time." The empress gently plucked the begonia branch in front of her face and walked to the depths of the imperial garden with her hands behind her back. Ning Kei followed behind her and looked at her with her hands behind her back. For some reason, he felt some admiration for her. Walking to the side of the quiet lake and standing in front of the flowering tree, the Empress said after a moment of silence, he did this behind my back. I even suspect that the Divine Hall did it in his name. She turned around and looked at Ning Ke quietly. She said, now that you are also a cultivator, you should know that if it was me or General Xiahou who attacked with all their strength, you and Li Yu would definitely not have a chance to survive. Ning Ke thought of the two powerhouses at the upper see-through state beside Xiahou and tacitly agreed. He said, if this matter was done by the Divine Hall, Your Majesty will not be able to find any evidence, because those people are General Xiahou's men after all. The Empress smiled slightly and said, I may not be able to convince Li Yu, but I think at least now you will have a different judgment on what happened at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road. Ning Ke said, in the wilderness, Lin Ling wanted to kill me. He knew that the Empress in front of him must know who Lin Ling was and must also know about the horse gang attack. He did not need to explain too much. The Empress said, I still do not think that the horse gang incident has anything to do with Xiahou. Ning Ke said, I agree with Your Majesty. I also think that Lin Ling did this behind General Xiahou's back. But General Xiahou expressed his tacit approval afterward and tried to kill me again at the north of Hulan Sea. The Empress said, Lin Ling would not do anything that would harm Xiahou's interests. So he would not try to kill you unless he knew that only one of you could survive. Ning Ke shook his head after a moment of silence and said, I was just an ordinary soldier in the city of Wei in the past. I have never even seen General Xiahou's face. Apart from these two things, it is impossible for there to be any hatred. The Empress looked at his eyes quietly and asked, there really is no hatred? Ning Ke said, indeed. The Empress suddenly bowed slightly to him. Ning Ke was inexplicably shocked. He hurriedly moved aside and said, Your Majesty, what are you doing? The previous matter has been settled by Mr. First. If there is really no hatred that cannot be solved, Mr. 13, please give me some face and let him retire peacefully. How about that? The Empress restrained herself in front of the flower tree and maintained a half-squatting posture. Walking on the crowded Vermilion Bird Avenue, Ning Ke looked calm, but his heart was in turmoil. Whether it was the god-stunning array that His Majesty took him to see or the Empress bowing in front of the flower tree, it was a pressure that he could not bear now. Previously in the Imperial Garden, the Empress also mentioned Mistress Jian. Ning Ke then remembered the rumors in Chang'an. The Empress and Aunt Jian were really as close as sisters. These things did not affect his mood. What really affected his mood was something else. Now the war in the northern wilderness had entered a stalemate. The Tang military did not seem to care about victory. There seemed to be some problems within the West Hill Divine Palace. They seemed to have the intention to temporarily stop the war and wait to see what would happen. This meant that Xiahou would come back in autumn. Ning Ke had long known that Xiahou came from the Desolate Man's tribe. At this time, he naturally understood why the northeast border military of the empire was so gentle in this war. Xiahou might not be so gentle to other enemies. Now Ning Ke was not afraid of Xiahou because he had the backing of the academy. But he did not know what to do when Xiahou came back. His Majesty secretly instructed him in the palace, and Her Majesty personally pleaded in front of the flowering tree. It was not because they were afraid that a cultivator in the see-through realm could cause a big storm. They just did not want this matter to involve the academy, and did not want Xiahou's retirement to have more twists and turns. The academy respected the law of the Tang Empire. The headmaster of the academy strictly forbade students from interfering in court affairs. Eldest brother had already allowed Xiahou to retire. It seemed that Ning Ke's revenge had all been written until the end, except for the last method. Tomorrow there will be 3 more chapters. Brace up your courage and say it with a trembling voice, and then recommend the first place on the weekly list. Thank you. It's a new day. Please continue to vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 4:19. The method was taught to him by the headmaster of the academy with a stick on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes. Eldest brother also hinted at it in the wilderness. He also thought of the method when he was imprisoned in the cliff cave. The method was simple, clear, and full of power. However, from another perspective, it could be said to be stupid and not in line with Ning Kei's bright but dark outlook on life. Standing on the streets of Chang'an in late spring, Ning Kei thought about what would happen after autumn. He was sometimes excited and sometimes gloomy. He did not notice a cloud floating from the north. "Are you Mr. 13? Ning Kei looked back and saw a man bowing to him respectfully. The man was dressed in ordinary civilian clothes, but it could not hide the stern aura of a soldier. Since last spring, he had become a celebrity in Chang'an. However, not many people had seen his face and could recognize him on the streets of Chang'an. Ning Kei was a little vigilant, especially because of the identity of the man. The man admitted his identity in the next sentence. "General Su Shi requests your presence." The Tang Empire dominated the world with iron armor and swept the world with force. Naturally, they valued and respected soldiers, especially the 4 generals. The Defender General of the state, Su Shi, had fought for decades and gained many military achievements. He had opened up countless territories for the empire. Even Xia Ho, who had been very famous in the past decade, could only look up to him. He was the most powerful person in the military of the empire in terms of military achievements and reputation. Ning Kei knew that the most powerful general did not have a good impression of him. He did not know the specific reason, but he knew that he would meet him sooner or later. However, he did not expect it to be today. He did not expect that he would be tracked by the Tang Empire the moment he left the palace. General Su Shi did not choose to meet Ning Kei at the military ministry. Instead, he chose to meet Ning Kei in the general's mansion near the Vermilion Bird Avenue. It seemed that this was a private conversation. Following the man into the imposing general's mansion, Ning Kei frowned slightly. He was stimulated by the killing aura emitted by the poplars and stones in the mansion. Walking into the depths of the general's mansion, he saw the old general sitting by a desk on a quiet platform. The old general wasn't wearing court robes, official robes, or armor. Instead, he was wearing very ordinary cloth clothes. He wasn't planting cabbages or sharpening knives. Instead, he was holding a rice bowl and eating. The dishes on the table were very simple: 2 bowls of brown rice, a bowl of pork belly, and 3 pieces of boiled vegetables. The man who led Ning Kei into the mansion left quietly. Ning Kei stood outside the stage. After a moment of silence, he walked up the stairs and bowed slightly in front of the old general. The old general said, "Sit." Ning Kei lifted the front lapel of his academy uniform and sat down. He looked across. The old general said, "I didn't expect you to come so soon. Let me finish my meal first. Mr. 13, please don't blame me for being rude." Ning Kei bowed his head and said, "General, your words make me afraid." The old general did not say anything more and continued to concentrate on eating. The old general's hair was white and his dark cheeks were full of wrinkles. He was a little hunched and wore ordinary cloth clothes. He looked like an idle old man that could be seen everywhere in Chang'an. However, when he picked up the chopsticks to pick up the meat, it was as if he was holding a spear and stabbing it into the chest of the enemy general. It was very domineering. Although the general was old, he was not an old general. A general was a general. Especially when facing the enemy. The streaky pork gravy mixed with the brown rice smelled a bit fragrant, but the taste was presumably only average. The general, however, enjoyed it very much. His grizzled beard trembled from time to time, and the 3 pieces of boiled vegetables made crunching sounds as he chewed on them. It was as if those legendary demons from the underworld were gnawing on human bones. Perhaps it was a habit formed during his military career. The general ate very quickly. He swept away all the food on the table like a gust of wind. Then, he picked up the teacup and rinsed his mouth. Ning Ke said, "Eating too quickly and drinking tea in a hurry is not good for your health." The general looked at him quietly and said, "You don't have to pretend in front of me." Ning Ke fell silent and stopped pretending to be a junior. He pretended to be gentle and considerate. The general said, "Cultivators should come out of the human realm, not enter it." Ning Ke did not expect that the conversation would enter the most critical stage without any foreshadowing or preamble. He could not help but be caught unprepared. He had originally thought that this would be a long conversation. He had thought that this conversation would be like boiling chicken soup and that they would need to test each other's fire control. He did not expect that it would be so fierce and quick. If he was not careful, the vegetables in the pot would become burnt and could no longer be eaten. Why not enter the human realm? Ning Ke asked after a moment of silence. The general looked into his eyes and said indifferently, "Because for cultivators, the human world is too weak. They are like ants. It is easy for cultivators to become arrogant when they enter the human realm." Ning Ke raised his head and looked back at the general's calm and oppressive eyes. He said, "General, you have fought for the Tang Empire and have been in the human world for decades. Before being a cultivator, I am first a soldier." The general said indifferently, "That is the biggest difference." Ning Ke said, "I am also a soldier." The general shook his head slowly and said, "You used to be a soldier and an excellent one. But unfortunately, you were not a cultivator when you were a soldier." "What's the difference?" Ning Ke asked. The general squinted and looked at him. He said in a low voice, "If you could cultivate in the city of Wei, I would have trained you well and made you a great martial cultivator. Then you would have been able to truly understand what is going on the battlefield. Then the stories later would not have happened." Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "I don't understand what you mean. I have seen all your files." The general's voice was emotionless and calm. "You are indeed a good soldier. But you have not experienced a real battle with cultivators." Ning Ke fell silent again. He had joined the army in the city of Wei when he was very young. But the Tang Empire was so powerful that even the cavalry of the Golden Palace on the grassland did not dare to provoke them. He had not experienced a real battle. He had not seen the performance of cultivators on the battlefield during his years of military service in the frontier fortress. The general said, "People think that cultivators are very powerful. But they do not know that on the real battlefield, cultivators are also very weak when facing the surging cavalry." Ning Ke thought of a powerhouse like Second Brother and could not agree with this statement. The general seemed to know what he was thinking and said coldly, "Even a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state can only die when facing the sky full of arrows and the charge of thousands of heavy cavalry. This has been proven countless times in the history of war." "Do you know why?" Ning Ke shook his head. The general said, "Because the cultivator's body is too weak. Unless he can cross the threshold and break through the 5 states and enter the limitless state, he can ignore the rain of arrows. Or he can enter the Tianqi state and understand the supreme power given by Haotian, he can ignore any impact. Otherwise, a cultivator alone will never be a match for an army." "What about powerhouses at the peak of martial arts like the general or General Xiao?" Ning Ke asked. General Su said, "Martial arts cultivators use their psyche power to summon the qi of heaven and earth to train their physical strength. They use their psyche power to condense the qi of heaven and earth on the surface of their bodies. However, as long as one is human, his sense of perception will be limited. His psyche power will eventually run out. If one person cannot kill him, then 100 people cannot. I will use 10,000 people to kill him. Remember, if a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts is invincible, why does the empire need to keep so many cavalry? Ning Ke placed his right hand on the table and looked into the general's deep eyes. As I said, don't pretend in front of me. The general said coldly, killing the horse gangs and chopping firewood is fine because the law of the Tang Empire does not protect people outside the borders. But how are you going to explain what happened in Min Mountain? One of the families had a newborn baby who also died in the fire. How are you going to explain it? No matter how you hide in front of the headmaster of the academy in His Majesty, no matter what image you have in the eyes of the world, no matter how frivolous and funny you pretend to be after you come to Chang'an, you can't change the fact that you are a shameless, cold-blooded, greedy, and murderous villain. Ning Ke lowered his head again and said nothing. He did not expect that the Tang Empire could investigate someone so far in the past. At this moment, he felt that his clothes had suddenly disappeared, as if he was naked. This feeling was not shame or guilt, but vigilance and uneasiness. He had never thought of himself as a good person, and he had never wanted to be one. In order to survive, in order to let Sang Sang live, he would do anything. Killing and arson were just ordinary things. The evil deeds that the general exposed were just an inconspicuous part of the bloody past. How could a person like him be a good person? Su Shi looked at him and said with disgust, Ning Ke, you are not a good person. There was dead silence on the platform. Ning Ke suddenly raised his head and looked at Su Shi who was sitting across the table. He asked with a smile, General, is there really a person as clean and guiltless as snow in the world? The general looked at him and said with a slight mockery, do you want to comfort yourself with the filth of others? Ning Ke shook his head and said, General, you talked about how difficult it is to be a martial cultivator and the suffering of the Tang Empire's soldiers. To me, it is a little boring. Because you have not experienced my life, you do not know what I have suffered. Naturally, you cannot understand the choice I made in the past. He looked at the general and said with a smile, in the deep forest of the mountains, you were caught by a hunter. For some reason, it could be because you stole a rabbit from his snare 10 days ago, or because the hunter was a damned rabbit to begin with, or because the hunter was a relative of the damned old hunter. In short, he wanted to kill you. What would you do? The general frowned slightly. Before the general said anything, Ning Ke continued with a smile, don't forget, you were not even 10 years old at that time. You were weak and tired because of malnutrition. You had a 5 or 6-year-old girl with you. You were injured and had no weapon. You only had a fire starter hidden in your crotch. Then you were locked in the woodshed. I don't know what you would do, General. But I would definitely light the thatch and dry wood in the woodshed. I don't care if the hunter died or not. I don't care if there was a baby in the room. Even if there was a paralyzed old man in the room, I would still light the fire. Ning Ke's smile was very gentle, and the expression in his eyes was very calm. The next chapter will be out before midnight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 420. Su Shi's eyes narrowed. He had fought all his life and seen blood and corpses. He had seen many horrible scenes. However, the gentle smile and calm expression on Ning Ke's face seemed to be more soul-stirring than those scenes he had seen in the past. In an instant, he thought more highly of Ning Ke and was more vigilant about how dangerous Ning Ke was. The sympathy that occasionally flashed in his eyes disappeared without a trace. Ning Ke continued, of course, the story of the hunter's family being burned to death has nothing to do with me. I just heard it from others. I'm just curious, under such circumstances, what would you choose? I still want to ask the previous question. Is there really a person as pure as a lotus in the world? General, have you ever killed prisoners of war on the battlefield? Is it against the law of the Tang Empire to kill prisoners of war? General, when your subordinates rode past the fortress, did they kill the women and children of the barbarians on the grassland? If so, is it against the law of the Tang Empire? Then he looked at the general's old face and asked, General, as an important minister of the Tang Empire, you should stand on the side of the Tang Empire. However, when the enemy's powerhouses entered the country, you not only did not guard against them, but also revealed my whereabouts to them. I would like to ask, even if this does not violate the law of the Tang Empire, does it violate your conscience? The repeated requests for guidance were like heavy punches that continuously pounded on the old general's heart. However, Su Shi would not be shaken by Ning Kei's words. He smiled slightly angrily and said, since you want to enter the human realm on behalf of the Academy, you have to accept the challenge of the world's powerhouses. Why don't you want to let them know your whereabouts? Are you afraid that you will lose face for the Tang Empire and the headmaster of the Academy? Before Ning Kei could speak, the general suddenly stopped smiling and looked at him coldly. He said, even if it was pardonable that you acted coldly when you were young, what about after coming to Chang'an from the city of Wei? After coming to Chang'an? Ning Kei slowly raised his eyebrows. Suddenly, there was a wind in the garden. It was slightly cold and the sky was dim. It seemed that it was going to rain. Where were you when the censor Zhang Yiqi died in the 14th year of Tianqi era? Where were you when the old blacksmith in the east of the city died? Where were you when the tea master Yan Suqing died? The general looked at him and asked indifferently. Ning Kei's expression did not change, but his body became stiff. If his previous questioning of the general was just a small trick, then the general's 3 consecutive questions of, "Where are you?" were really sharp and cold knives that could cut off a person's head. He finally understood why Su Shi was so wary of him and even secretly investigated and suppressed him. He confirmed that many people, starting from Lin Ling to the current number 1 person in the Tang military, had noticed the murders and even smelled the scent behind them. Today, in the general's mansion, the conversation between him and the general. He was a general. When the censor Zhang Yiqi died, you were in the House of Red Sleeves. When Chen Zixian died, you were in the east of the city. When Yan Suqing died, no one knew where you were. However, that day was the Academy's examination. You had a bet with Xie Qingyun of the South Jin Kingdom, but for some reason, you did not attend the examination and even took 2 days of sick leave. The general stared into his eyes and said slowly with endless pressure, don't think that you are really strong, don't think that you can really hide from everyone in the world, and don't think that you can erase the past just because you have become the core disciple of the headmaster of the Academy. I said that I know everything about you, so I will tell you everything. Not a single thing will be missing. Not a single thing would be missing. Not a single thing could be missing. This was the spirit of the number 1 person in the Tang military. Ning Kei heard the general say something like this for the 3rd time today. He did not know how many times he fell into silence. There was also silence on the platform. The poplar trees in the garden were slightly trembling in the wind before the rain. The leaves that should have lived in the north whistled, as if they would fall to the ground at any time. No one knew how long it had been. The general said, the headmaster of the Academy once said that the law of the Tang Empire comes first. This is the highest creed not only for the Academy, but also for the entire Tang Empire. I will investigate what happened in the past. If I find out that you have violated the law of the Tang Empire, interfered with the court affairs, or even plotted against us, I will punish you according to the law of the Tang Empire. Ning Kei suddenly reached out and stacked the dishes in front of him. Then he stood up, looked at the general and said, the law of the Tang Empire emphasizes evidence. If you can get the evidence of these murder cases, I will wait for you in the Chang and local government. After saying this, he bowed to the general and left. After walking out of the general's mansion, it was not long before Ning Ke arrived at the familiar Vermilion Bird Avenue. He strolled on the flat bluestone road, looking calm and composed. In the end, someone still guessed that he was related to those murder cases. This made him very nervous, but he was not shocked by the conversation in the general's mansion. Even if Su Shi could represent the entire Tang Empire to sweep the world, he could not accuse Ning Ke without evidence, let alone cause any harm to him. Because he was not a soldier in the city of Wei, nor was he a foreigner who had just arrived in Chang'an. He was now a student of the second floor of the academy and a great calligrapher who was close to His Majesty. If he wanted to harm him now, he must first convince His Majesty, and most importantly, the headmaster of the academy. Ning Ke could not guess His Majesty's attitude, but he was very clear that the headmaster of the academy would not care how many people his student had killed, because the headmaster of the academy did not care about worldly affairs. However, some parts of the conversation in the general's mansion did have some emotional impact on him. Su Shi was right. From the time he escaped from Chang and to the thousands of miles of starvation and entered the dangerous Min Mountain, Ning Ke was, in a way, a person who did all kinds of evil. The reason why he did all kinds of evil was because the world he lived in was full of evil. In order to survive in the evil world, he had to do all kinds of evil. Later, he came to the city of Wei and then to Chang'an. He came to the peaceful and happy world and found that there were still many good people in the world, so he began to try to be a good person in the general sense. Everyone wanted to be a good person. Ning Ke also wanted to be a good person. Therefore, he had been learning how to be a good person since the city of Wei, all the way to Chang'an. This kind of learning could be said to be a kind of disguise, or even more like the formation of a second personality. This kind of personality was very unstable. Sometimes he was mean, sometimes he nagged, and sometimes he pretended to be shameless to win people's favor. It was a little fresh, and a little cute. But the real temperament in his bones was actually still the moment when he held the blood-dripping hatchet in the woodshed of the official of council's mansion when he was 4 years old. If he faced external pressure, if he faced death again, that ruthless and cold temperament would burst out from the deepest part of his body without hesitation. It was the night when he climbed to the second floor. It was the same when he met the horse gang in the wilderness. It was the same when he shot Prince Long Qing by the Daming Lake. It was always like this, and sometimes not. This was Ning Quebec unconsciously. He walked to the front of the Vermilion Bird. At this moment, the spring rain that had been planned for a long time finally fell. Chapter 3, Try to finish before 2:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 421. The rain fell from the sky, and the pedestrians on the street took shelter. The tourists from other counties also reluctantly left. Only Ning Ke was left standing in front of the Vermilion Bird in silence. He opened the big black umbrella, and the raindrops fell on the tight surface of the umbrella, making a dull sound. He looked at the painting of the Vermilion Bird in front of the umbrella that was gradually drenched by the rain and thought of many things. There was no need to mention the past. Today, in the palace, the empress bowed in shock, and in the general's mansion, Su Shi was the general, which made him feel very troublesome. In particular, Su Shi's attitude made him very uncomfortable. This kind of discomfort was not anger, but a feeling of loss. Because he used to be a soldier of the Tang Empire, just like his comrades in the city of Wei, he regarded the #1 military man of the Tang Empire as his idol. When they were drinking and chatting, they would be in awe when the name of the Defender General of the state was mentioned. He remembered a certain saying about spiritual needs. He liked riding horses on the grassland with his comrades in the city of Wei and risking his life. He liked being respected and even feared by the people in Chang'an City. He liked his senior brothers and sisters at the back of the mountain of the academy. These were all wonderful spiritual needs. Therefore, he wanted to be a good person and be appreciated by a military official like Su Shi. He didn't want to be wary of him or even want to get rid of him. Unfortunately, things didn't always go as one wished. The spring rain was getting heavier and heavier. It was a mess, just like Ning Kei's mood at the moment. The solemn and elegant vermilion bird was drenched by the rain. That pair of majestic eyes seemed to be endowed with some kind of life and suddenly became lively. Ordinary people were completely unable to sense the changes in the vermilion bird portrait. Ning Kei clearly felt it. He looked at the eyes of the vermilion bird and felt the aura gradually condensing in the stone lines on the ground. He was very clear about what had happened. 2 years ago, when he first entered Chang'an City and stood in front of the vermilion bird with Sang Sang, he was scared stiff by the ancient murderous intent emitted by the painting. Later, he knew that the vermilion bird was a Taoist divine talisman. It could automatically sense the enemies invading Chang'an City and could exert a power close to that of a powerhouse at the peak of knowing destiny state. The enemy sensed by the vermilion bird was, of course, the big black umbrella in Ning Kei's hand. With Ning Kei's current cultivation state, it was naturally impossible for him to resist the aura of the vermilion bird. However, he stood in the spring rain with an unusually calm expression. It was not because of the big black umbrella in his hand. It was because he had a pestle in his arms. Ning Kei put his left hand into his bosom and held the array pestle wrapped in cloth. Looking at the vermilion bird painting in front of the umbrella, he said, "Now is not the same as before. Do you think I will still be scared out of my wits or become a quail in winter? I'm your master now. What can you do to me?" The owner of the divine talisman of Suzaku could not be self-proclaimed. It was passed down to him by Master Yen Sei, and then confirmed by the Emperor of the Tang Empire and finally confirmed by the pestle. The vermilion bird painting in the rain sensed the familiar aura coming from under the black umbrella. A clear roar sounded in Ning Kei's sense of perception. It was sharp and high-pitched, mixed with some doubts, unwillingness, sadness, and indifference. The rain continued to wash it, and the ancient murderous aura in the vermilion bird painting gradually faded until it finally returned to silence, turning into an ordinary stone painting. Ning Kei knew that this meant that the vermilion bird had acknowledged his identity. The sorrow in the previous cry in the sea of consciousness was the vermilion bird's recollection of its master, Yen Sei. Ning Kei stood in the rain, holding the handle of the big black umbrella in his right hand and the array pestle of the God-stunning array in his left hand. Feeling the two different sensations, he understood something. The vermilion bird recognized its master in the spring rain, which represented the big array of Chang'an. From then on, it represented the safety of the Tang Empire and became his responsibility. He liked this land, this country, this peaceful and happy life, and he liked the people who lived here. Therefore, he was willing to take this responsibility. He was willing to use anything except his life to maintain the peace of the Tang Empire. But this did not mean that he would lose his life. Holding the array pestle in his left hand was holding the future of the Tang Empire. Holding the black umbrella in his right hand was holding his life. He had to hold both hands, and he had to hold both hands tightly. If there was a conflict between the two, like the lingering spring rain, then what he needed to do was to cut the spring rain in front of him with a knife like when he went to the old library, and smash all the conflicts and dissatisfaction like when the headmaster hit him on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes. On that night on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes, he once had such a conversation with the headmaster. "The person I want to kill is very powerful, has a high position, and has a background that even I find difficult to deal with. You don't look like a person without a high position. Because my teacher is very great, so of course I am also great. Now, even compared with the tycoon I want to kill, our identities and statuses are similar. Then why are you still worried? If you want to kill, just find an opportunity to do so. My teacher seems to be very willing to let us students be unreasonable. But in fact, he is very stubborn and very reasonable. He always says that the law of the Tang Empire is the first, and the law of the Tang Empire is the first. How can he be unreasonable? What does being unreasonable have to do with the law of the Tang Empire? Can't I kill people if I don't use crooked ways? At that time, Ning Kai thought that the person he was talking to was an ordinary tycoon in Chang'an. Now that he thought that these words came from his teacher, they naturally took on a new meaning. Can't I kill people if I don't use crooked ways? Can't I kill Xiaofan if I don't use crooked ways? Ning Kai smiled, put the big black umbrella back on his back, and rushed into the curtain of spring rain. He went to the House of Red Sleeves and met with Mistress Jian. He told her about his conversation with the Empress in the palace. Before he left, he took a detour to the bathhouse, where he had killed the censor, Zhang Yiqi. Then he went to the small courtyard by the lake in South City. Walking through the green bamboo forest, he found that the small courtyard had changed owners after he killed Yan Suqing, the tea master. He went to the blacksmith workshop in East City, and walked to the door of the backyard, silently imagining the scene of the old Chen Zixian falling under his knife. I used to kill you for no reason. Now my identity and status are different. If I stop for the stability and prosperity in the future, won't it be a waste for you to die? The rain gradually lightened, and Ning Kai was ready to go back to the old brush pen shop, but stopped at the entrance of Lin 47th Street. He turned to Chuanxi Road and entered a tea house. Su Shi had already guessed the connection between him and those murder cases. He might even have connected those murder cases to the massacre of the general's mansion. Even if he had not connected this matter yet, he would definitely start to protect some people that he wanted to kill. Besides General Xiaofan, there were still people alive on the oil paper list left by Darky. If Ning Kai wanted to kill them, he had to race against time with the imperial court. Sitting on the second floor of the tea house, looking at the pitter-patter of rain outside the railing, he carefully thought about the steps and began to prepare after making sure that he would not cause too much trouble. He asked for a pen and paper from the shopkeeper, and after thinking for a while, he began to write a letter hastily, and then sealed it, ready to send the letter to the academy by carriage. At this moment, he suddenly saw a familiar figure. That person also saw him, and said in surprise, "Ning Kai, why are you here?" Ning Kai said mockingly, "Chu Yuxian, you did not go to the academy again today. Be careful that your old master finds out, and he will directly cut off your money." Ning Kai's current status was already very different from before, but Chu Yuxian was originally a generous and cheerful person, and had the usual mindset of the Tangs, not afraid of the rich and powerful. He came over happily and said, "What's there to be afraid of? You can just write a section for me. Moreover, if you want to go to the House of Red Sleeves, with your current reputation, do you still need me to invite you? Of course, you should invite me." Chu Yuxian's eyes suddenly brightened, and he said, "Since you have nothing to do in the tea house, and you did not bring that little handmaiden with you, why don't we go to the House of Red Sleeves?" Ning Kai shook his head and said, "I have something to do today." Suddenly, he thought of something, and handed over the letter on the table, and asked, "I have a letter to send to the back of the mountain of the academy, can I trouble you to go there?" Chu Yuxian said bitterly, "You know that I hate going to the academy the most." Ning Kai said, "A section for writing." "Zhongtang?" Chu Yuxian said happily. Ning Kai laughed and scolded him, "You wish." Chu Yuxian took the letter, and his eyes suddenly turned. Ning Kai obviously knew what he was thinking, and said, "Don't think about stealing this letter to sell, or I will not write the section, and I will go to your house to make trouble. It is just calligraphy appreciation, how can you say you stole it? Even if you stole it, how can you bear to sell it? Of course I will bring it home for my cultured father to be happy. Chu Yuxian was not embarrassed when Ning Ke saw through his thoughts, and he said with a smile. Ning Ke said seriously, this letter is very important, don't dare to delay my business. Chu Yuxian said, then I will go now. Oh yes, there will be a gathering of classroom 3 in a few days. I forgot the reason, but Jin Wuxia asked me to ask you if you want to go. If I have time, I will go. Ning Ke did not say anything definite. Chu Yuxian turned around and walked out of the tea house, and suddenly thought of something, and said, what are you going to do? Ning Ke said with a smile, I am going to kill someone, do you want to come and watch? Chu Yuxian felt bored, and he waved his hand and walked down the stairs. Ning Ke drank all the tea on the table, and stuck his head out of the window. He saw Chu Yuxian get on the horse carriage, and carefully calculated the time. He was not in a hurry to leave, and instead asked for a new pot of tea. He slowly drank it in the tea house. The spring rain was falling outside the tea house. The sky above Chang'an City was covered with rain clouds, and the sun could not be seen. Only the gradually dimming light showed that dusk was coming. Ning Ke took out a piece of silver, put it on the table, and left the tea house. Accompanied by the surprised and respectful farewell of the tea master, he walked towards the West City Gate. He did not joke with Chu Yuxian earlier. He was really going to kill someone. I am very happy to say that I can't take it anymore. There will definitely not be such a thing tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 422. The dusk disappeared, and the drizzle came again. A middle-aged official with a thin face walked on the rainy street with an umbrella in his hand. Judging from the color of his official uniform, his rank was not low, but there were no attendants beside him. There was only a cold-looking general following him silently. The soldiers and lower-level officials at the West City Gate stood quietly under the eaves. Their eyes followed the footsteps of the two officials in the street. No one stepped forward, and no one showed a surprised expression. The middle-aged official was the city gate officer Huang Xing, who was responsible for the opening and closing of all the gates in Chang'an and the imperial city. The general following him was Yushui Zhu, a deputy general of the city gate army. Huang Xing was known for his diligence and incorruptibility. Ever since he took over the position of the city gate officer, he would choose a city gate to patrol every morning and evening. Other than Yushui Zhu, he did not bring any subordinate officials with him. He was light and unaccompanied, rain or shine, and there was not a day that he did not do this. The people at the city gates of Chang'an were already used to the scene in front of them. They could only leave after the two sirs finished patrolling. This had become an unwritten rule. According to the rules of the past years, the city gate officer Huang Xing patrolled the West City Gate today. After patrolling the West Gate, Huang Xing confirmed that there were no problems and nodded his head. General Yushui Zhu turned his head to look at the nervous soldiers and officials under the eaves and waved his hand coldly. Everyone knew that today was finally over. With relaxed expressions, they dispersed and returned to their homes. Standing on the rainy street outside the government office of the West City Gate, Huang Xing tilted his umbrella and looked up at the drizzle. He felt his legs were a little tired and said bitterly, I'm old after all. Yushui Zhu said, Your Excellency can still serve the imperial court for another 30 years. Huang Xing asked, You've accompanied me to patrol the city gates every day and returned home at night every day. My sister-in-law has long been dissatisfied. You've really worked hard. Yushui Zhu replied after a moment of silence, my life is given by you, your excellency. Not to mention accompanying you to the 9 city gates of Chang'an, it's natural even if I die. Today, these 2 famous honest officials in Chang'an city used to be comrades in the military camp. Their fates had been changed by a tragedy and were now closely linked. If Huang Xing had not made up his mind to take Yu Shuizhu to princely Peiyan, he might have died along with that general. Even if he did not die, he would have been neglected by the imperial court. Without princely Peiyan's protection, he would not have had the hard work and honor of patrolling the gate of Chang'an. Unfortunately, they were still affected by that incident in the past. Although the 2 of them were diligent and incorruptible, they had reached the end of their official and military positions. It would be difficult for them to be promoted any further, but at least they had glory, splendor, and wealth. Huang Xing looked at the city of Chang'an in the drizzle. After a long silence, he suddenly said with emotion, "When we followed the general back to Chang'an, we seemed to have entered the west gate." Yu Shuizhu's expression turned solemn. Every day, when the 2 of them patrolled the city gates at dawn and dusk, they talked about the affairs of the manors and the interesting matters of the court. They also reminisced about their military careers, but they never mentioned that general. That was because the 2 of them did not want to remember the tragedy and the role they played in it. Maybe it was because of guilt, or maybe it was because of fear. Yu Shuizhu did not understand why His Excellency would suddenly feel this way today. He said in a low voice, according to the imperial court's rules, they should have entered the city from the east gate. Later, this incident was used as evidence. Huang Xing sighed and did not speak again. The rain was getting heavier in the twilight. The pedestrians had already returned home. The subordinate officials of the city gate department had probably returned to their warm manners. The soldiers on night duty were hiding at the city gate or in the duty room. The wet street was empty and quiet. Only the sound of the rain accompanied the 2 of them as they silently recalled the past. 2 carriages were waiting silently at the 2 ends of the rainy street. They were sent by their manors. The stewards in the mansion had long been used to the rule of the adults and did not come to urge them. At this moment, footsteps suddenly sounded on the rainy street. The footsteps were very soft and stable. If one listened carefully, they could almost hear the subtle sound of boots stepping on puddles. It was a young man dressed in black with a black umbrella on his back. Strangely, the young man did not hold an umbrella. He let the rain fall on him. His clothes had long been soaked and the rain slid down a few strands of hair hanging down from his forehead. Huang Xing looked at the young man in black who was walking towards them and slowly raised his eyebrows. He only felt that the drenched young man in black was a little strange. He did not sense any dangerous aura and he did not think that anything would happen. That was because they were in Chang'an, a city with good security. They were at the heavily guarded West City Gate. Regardless of whether they were daring female soldiers or powerful cultivators, they would all become humble and calm in the face of the Tang Empire's majesty and powerful military power. Indeed, nothing happened. After a moment, the oil paper umbrella fell from the sky and landed on the rainy street. Huang Xing, who was under the umbrella, had already turned into ashes without a sound. The umbrella slowly rolled in the puddles, its handle slightly scorched. In an alley not far away, Ning Ke stood quietly in the rain. He did not know whether it was because of the violent emotional fluctuations or the cold spring rain, but his face was a little pale and he looked a little tired. 1 chapter today, 3 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 423. The number of chapters in the first few chapters are all wrong. Damn it. I'm sorry. My fingers were caught by the table and the chair. I'm stupid. It hurts. Wuxiang, continue to write. Try to finish the second chapter before midnight. In the alley in the rain, Ning Ke looked at his soaked black academy uniform and opened the big black umbrella. It would not be too difficult to kill the two of them, but it would be difficult to kill them before the imperial court, especially the military, realized what was going on and killed them silently. Huang Xing, who turned into ashes under the oil paper umbrella, was killed by his fire talisman. Yu Shuizhu was killed by Jing Fu. The Jing Fu was the most powerful divine talisman of Master Yen Sei. Before going to the wilderness, Master Yen Sei had passed this talisman to Ning Quebec. But because the talisman was abstruse, Ning Ke didn't really master the talisman's talisman until a few days ago when he broke out of the cliff cave. With the Great Spirit as the guide, the Jing Fu that Ning Ke successfully cast was more like a simulation. Of course, it was not a divine talisman, and it was far from the magical power of Master Yen Sei's Jing Fu. But it was very easy to silently cut a person into pieces in this spring rain. In the night, Ning Ke left the West City Gate with the umbrella. He went to the Imperial Palace first and found the deputy commander of the bodyguard, Su Chongshan. He handed over some things and then returned to Lin 47th Street. Sang Sang looked at him, who was wet all over, with a worried and confused expression on her face. Ning Ke explained in a low voice and went to the backyard to take a cold shower. Then he began to eat. Ning Ke sat at the table in front of the shop and looked at the funeral notes left by Sang Sang 2 years ago. He was silent for a long time and thought of Darky who died opposite the shop. It was also in spring, and it was also in the spring rain. Before Darky died, he left a list of those who had participated in the 2 tragedies. Now that Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu were dead, the people on the list were all dead. But there were still 2 people who deserved to die. Joyer didn't write their names on the list because he and Ning Ke both knew who they were. They didn't need to remember or forget. Princely Pei Yan of the Tang Empire and the Defender General Xia Ho. Sang Sang walked behind him and asked, "Will there be any trouble?" Ning Ke said, "Even if the old general can guess it, he can't do anything to me." Sang Sang was puzzled and asked, "Why are you in such a hurry?" In the past, when he killed Censor Zhang Yiqi or Chen Zixian, Ning Ke had to investigate for a long time. Only when he was sure that the imperial court did not notice the matter did he make a sound. Gate guard Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu were important figures in the massacre of the general's mansion years ago. Ning Ke had been investigating them for a long time, but it still felt a little rash for him to choose to take action today. Some people in the court have already guessed that I did it. Ning Ke handed the note on the table to Sang Sang and motioned her to keep it. He said, "If I don't do it today, I may not have the chance to do it in the future." Sang Sang took the letter and said, "If you still want to go to the general's mansion tomorrow, I will go with you." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "No, I have already sent a message to the academy. Someone will accompany me when the time comes." The next morning, before the stall of hot and sour sliced noodle soup was set up, several officials from the Tang military ministry had already come to the old brush pen shop and knocked on the door. Ning Ke was already prepared. He pushed the door open and walked out. He looked at the official he met yesterday on Vermilion Bird Avenue and said, "General wants to talk to me again?" The official's expression was much colder than yesterday. He said simply, "Please come in." Yesterday, he was defeated by Su Shi in the general's mansion, and then he killed 2 people after leaving the general's mansion. This was like a hard slap in the face of the Tang military ministry. Ning Ke was absolutely not surprised that General Su Shi would summon him again today. However, he did not expect that the place to talk today was not the general's mansion, but the Tang military ministry. Several horse carriages left Lin 47th Street and went straight north along Vermilion Bird Avenue. After passing Jianshan Archway, there was a very quiet and sparse forest, and the horse carriages turned into the forest. Ning Kai lifted the curtain and looked out. He could vaguely see a large flat meadow behind the dense forest, which looked like the scenery beyond the Great Wall. He could not help but feel a little surprised. The Tang Empire was founded on martial arts and fought in the north and south. The military ministry governed the four major border armies, the prefectural armies, and the Yulin Royal Guards. It was the most authoritative department in the empire, and in the hearts of foreigners, it was the most terrifying place in the world. This was the first time that Ning Kai came to the military ministry. He did not expect that there would be such a meadow and flat forest beside Vermilion Bird Avenue. It looked simple and plain, but in Chang'an, where land prices were rising day by day, it was in fact extremely luxurious. He also did not expect that the Tang military ministry did not have a strict atmosphere at all. There were no high walls, watchtowers, and quiet yamen, but only dozens of independent pavilions hidden in the green forest and meadow. The pavilions with black eaves and bright tiles were of different heights and seemed to be disorderly, but they were located in the grass forest in picturesque disorder. Su Shi said coldly, "The conversation with you yesterday was to warn you that the Tang Empire needs stability and can't have internal strife. You should focus on the overall situation and know how to respect the law. Ning Kai, you are a student of the second floor of the academy. I think you should be able to understand what I'm saying." Ning Kai said, "General's teachings yesterday deeply shocked me. When I returned to the old brush pen shop last night, I asked the handmaiden to take out the law of the Tang Empire and read it by candlelight. Sure enough, I learned a lot." Seeing that he was still as tired as yesterday, the anger in Su Shi's heart gradually accumulated, but the expression on his old face became calmer and calmer. He asked a question lightly. He asked, "Yesterday at dusk, when Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu died, where were you?" Ning Kai frowned slightly as if he was recalling. After a moment, he answered, "I was shopping." Su Shi asked, "Yesterday at dusk, it rained heavily. Which street were you shopping on?" Ning Kai said, "I like to be drenched in the rain." Su Shi asked, "Yesterday at the West City Gate, it was a talisman master who killed them." Ning Kai said, "How daring." Su Shi looked at him and said expressionlessly, "There are not many talisman masters in the world, especially the talisman masters in Chang'an City. The Imperial Center Administration has records of them." Ning Kai looked at him and said with a smile, "Then we have to ask the Imperial Center Administration to investigate quickly. Although the number of talisman masters is small, I think there are more than one or two. It may be more troublesome to investigate." Su Shi said, "You are also a talisman master." Ning Kai answered, "I do know a lot of things. It is reported that when the murder happened last night, a young man in black with a black umbrella on his back appeared at the West City Gate." Su Shi quietly looked at the black uniform of the academy on him. Ning Kai said, "I also carried a big black umbrella on my back. Speaking of which, it seems that I went to the West City Gate at that time. Unfortunately, there are many young people who like to wear black." Su Shi said, "But a young talisman master in black with a black umbrella on his back, who else in the world but you?" Ning Kai looked at him and asked, "General, are you suspecting that I killed those two officials?" Su Shi said directly, "Yes, because you can't tell me where you were at that time." Ning Kai suddenly asked, "General, are you interrogating a case?" Su Shi said coldly, "Am I not qualified to do so?" Ning Kai shook his head and said, "If I were still a small soldier in the city of Wei, General would naturally be qualified to interrogate me. But after the preliminary examination of the academy, I have changed from military status to civilian status. Even if I am suspected, only the Chang and local government can interrogate me. General, you are indeed not qualified to do so. Su Shi looked at him expressionlessly and said, according to His Majesty's decree, the Imperial Center Administration and the Military Ministry are both in charge of the Imperial Center Administration. Now you are a visiting professor of the Imperial Center Administration. Why can't I interrogate you? Ning Ke took out the waist token of a visiting professor of the Imperial Center Administration from his belt and gently put it on the railing beside the pavilion. He said, last night I went to the bodyguard office to ask. The day before yesterday, His Majesty had agreed to my request to withdraw from the Imperial Center Administration. But I still keep this waist token with me for the time being. Now I don't want this waist token, so General can't interrogate me. Su Shi did not expect that Ning Ke would do this in advance. He frowned deeply and then gradually relaxed his brows. With a mocking and shameless expression, he said, "You really dare not let me interrogate you." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 424. A mocking and disdainful expression appeared on the face of the prestigious military leader of the Tang Empire. This slightly frivolous expression did not make Ning Ke feel that he was more like an ordinary person. Instead, he felt a heavy pressure. He replied slowly, "It's not that I don't dare to, but I don't want to." General, you said that the military ministry has a pavilion without walls. I agree with you. The Tang Empire dominates the world and will not collapse no matter what happens in the outside world. I'm just worried that the disaster will come from within the city walls. If you insist on interrogating me, I'm afraid that the military is trying to suppress the academy in the eyes of outsiders. He said, I know you don't mean that, but we can't send this wrong message to the enemies of the Tang Empire. So I don't want you to interrogate me, and you can't interrogate me either. Ning Ke, Ning Quebec, the expression on Su Shi's face disappeared. He looked at Ning Ke and said coldly, if you don't deny it and take responsibility, maybe I can praise you as a man. Ning Ke replied, it's not bad if I can be a good poet. Su Shi said, you're determined to challenge the military of the Tang Empire? What an arrogant madman. Do you really think you're qualified? Although I don't understand what you mean. Ning Ke paused and said, I'm the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. I represent the academy to enter the human realm and follow youngest uncle to travel the world. I really don't know what I'm not qualified to do. Su Shi stared at his eyes for a long time. Then he walked to the railing with his hands behind his back and looked down at Chang and city outside the grass forest. He said, you used to be a soldier, so you should know the duty of the Tang Empire's soldiers. So don't think that I don't dare to kill you. As he said this, a strong and indifferent aura exuded from the slightly bent body of the general, completely isolating him from the world around him. The fresh forest wind flowing through the pavilion suddenly stopped without a sound. The green trees outside the railings also stopped swaying. The superfluous leaves that had been blown off by the wind also stopped rolling among the grass. From Ning Ke's point of view, everything outside the attic's railing became motionless at this moment, like a landscape painting confined by a frame. He himself had become a part of the landscape painting. Only the old man by the railing, completely isolated from the landscape, was still free. The aura of heaven and earth in the pavilion had already been completely controlled by the old man by the railing. It was motionless and had lost all of its vitality. As long as he willed it, he could crush everything here. Looking at the back of the seemingly desolate and stooped old man who was actually extremely powerful and terrifying, Ning Ke was speechless. He thought to himself that the old man was indeed the most powerful person in the Tang military. This level of cultivation had actually faintly surpassed the limits of the peak of the martial Tao. Ning Ke was very clear that he had absolutely no way to fight against such a powerful state. As long as Su Shiwei moved his mind, the solidified qi of heaven and earth around him would instantly crush him into powder. Cold sweat gradually soaked the back of his clothes and the big black umbrella behind him. The expression on his face remained calm. In the landscape painting, only the old man by the railing was free. Fortunately, the old man seemed to want to hear what he had to say, so Ning Ke's mouth was free. I entered the imperial city yesterday. Ning Ke looked at the back of the old man by the railing and said, His Majesty took me to the small building. He knew that as the leader of the Tang military, Su Shi definitely knew what the small building in the imperial palace meant. As expected, the old man's court robe fluttered a little. He continued, Before going to the general's mansion yesterday, I first went to the Vermilion Bird Avenue. Before he finished speaking, Su Shi asked, The Vermilion Bird has recognized its master? Ning Ke said, Yes. So you should know that I am now responsible for the safety of Chang'an. If you really care about the Tang Empire and want to fulfill your duty as a Tang soldier, what you need to do now is to protect my safety, not to try to kill me. Su Shi stood by the railing and looked into the distance with his hands behind his back. After a long silence, he suddenly murmured with some regret and anger, I did not expect to fall into your hands in the end. Ning Ke did not say anything. Su Shi turned around and looked at him expressionlessly. He said, The reason why I investigated you is that I did not agree with His Majesty to hand over the array I pestle to you. To tell you the truth, Yen Sei and I have been friends for many years. But I think he has misjudged you, and so has the headmaster of academy. Ning Ke did not expect the military leader of the Tang Empire to have such a deep friendship with his master. He could not understand what had happened recently. He slightly raised his eyebrows and asked, Why? Because you are not upright. Because you are heartless and cold-blooded. Because I am very clear that if the Tang Empire is really at a critical juncture, you will not live and die with this magnificent city. Su Shi looked at him and said word by word. Ning Ke fell silent again. He had to admit that Su Shi was right about him. Yesterday in front of the Vermilion Bird painting, he had been full of heroic spirit and silently vowed to protect Chang'an and the Tang Empire. However, before he truly vowed in his heart, he still put his life in the most important position. After a long silence, he raised his head and looked at Su Shi seriously. He said, I can promise you that at least I will do my best. Su Shi said, How can I trust you? Ning Ke asked, Why can't you trust me? Su Shi said, Because you are not trustworthy. Ning Ke asked back, What kind of people are trustworthy? Su Shi said, Like your master Yen Sei. He seems to be playful, but he actually knows what is justice and what is reverence. Ning Ke shook his head and said, My master is dead. Although you have been friends with him for decades, I don't think you know him well enough. My master has never been a person who upholds justice. He doesn't know reverence either. He only knows what is called responsibility. And I know that too. Su Shi said, Your hands are stained with too much blood. You are not qualified to hold that pestle. Ning Ke said, Yesterday in the general's mansion, you asked me where I was when Censor Zhang Yiqi died in the 14th year of Tianqi era. Where was I when the old blacksmith in the east of the city died? Where was I when tea master Yen Suqing died? Today in this attic, you asked me where I was when Huang and you died last night. Su Shi looked back at him coldly. Ning Ke asked calmly, You have asked me many questions about where I was. I also want to ask, where were you when Xiaofan massacred the villages in the Yen territory and burned hundreds of innocent people? Where were you when Xiaofan buried 30,000 surrendered soldiers? Where were you when the Xianwei general's mansion was flooded with blood? As he listened to these questions, Su Shi seemed to have aged a little in an instant. The atmosphere in the attic loosened a little, and the scenery outside the building came to life again. Ning Ke took 2 steps forward and came to Su Shi. He continued, "There is indeed a lot of blood on my hands. General, maybe there is no blood on your hands, but it doesn't mean that your hands are cleaner than mine. As you said, I am certainly not a good person. I never care about the ugly, bloody, and unfair things in the world as long as they have nothing to do with me. Maybe I am not qualified to hold that pestle, but there are not many people in the world who are qualified to question my right to hold that pestle. At least not you, General." Xiaofan was able to stay out of it, and those generals and captains who massacred the villages were not punished. The imperial court said that there was no evidence and the case could not be investigated according to the law of the Tang Empire. In fact, you and I both know that it was only because Xiaofan had made contributions to the Tang Empire and the northeast border military was useful to the empire. Ning Ke said, "Since the imperial court insists that the law of the Tang Empire comes first, then if you want to investigate my relationship with those murders, please find evidence first. Otherwise, please don't bother me in the future." Su Shi was silent for a long time. He looked at him and asked coldly, "Then can you tell me, did you do it for justice or for revenge?" "I am not a messenger of justice." Ning Ke said, "There is no hatred between me and General Xiaofan. It is only because he offended me in the wilderness." Su Shi said, "Who can believe this?" Ning Ke said, "I don't need others to believe me. As long as the headmaster and His Majesty have no objections." Su Shi said, "Do you think His Majesty will always favor and trust you?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, "This has nothing to do with favor and trust. But I think even if His Majesty knew about this, he would probably think that I did the right thing." He suddenly felt that he had said enough today. So he turned around and walked to the stairs. However, at this moment, Su Shi suddenly sighed. "You are very calm. I can imagine that you will become a very good person in the future, even better than Kuharan. Then you may also be more dangerous than him." Ning Ke heard the voice behind him and stopped. He thought of what His Majesty had said in the palace. Su Shi was undefeated on the battlefield, but he had suffered a great loss in the hands of youngest uncle. Did he really have to bear the consequences for his teacher? He turned around and looked at Su Shi who was standing by the railing. He was finally annoyed. "I respect you as the Defender General of the state. That's why I said so much to you with sincerity. If you really want to fall out with me and don't care about the law of the Tang Empire, then why did you say so much nonsense before? The law of the Tang Empire is not a fig leaf. It is the foundation of the Tang Empire. If you still think this way, then I can't let it continue like this." Su Shi looked at him and said calmly, "As long as it doesn't violate the law of the Tang Empire, I have many ways to make you disappear." Ning Ke said, "I am looking forward to it." Then he shook his head and said, "Don't lead some Buddhist and Taoist people to challenge me like the previous times. You should know that it is not very useful." Su Shi said, "Do you really think that no one dares to challenge you after Lu Yiqing lost to you?" Ning Ke said, "At least a big shot like you will not challenge me, because you can't afford to lose that face." At this moment, a voice sounded behind him. "I can afford to lose that face." Ning Ke turned around and saw a slightly fat man at the entrance of the stairs. The man smiled and said, "My name is Wang Jinglu." Ning Ke looked at Su Shi who was standing by the railing and shook his head. He said, "It's a bit vulgar. My hand hurts and I am upset. The 3rd chapter may be late. Please don't wait. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.